She didn't scream when they flipped her table. She didn't flinch when the glass shattered at her feet. She just looked up, slowly, calmly, at the three men standing over her, and said, in a voice so quiet the bartender had to lean forward to hear it, "You're going to want to walk away." Nobody in that lounge believed her. That was their first mistake. And somewhere in the shadows at the far end of the bar, a man who had spent 20 years learning to read people in the dark watched the whole thing unfold, and felt for the first time in longer than he could remember, genuinely uncertain about what he was seeing. His name was Adrian Valenti, and the woman sitting alone with a glass of tequila at 2:13 in the morning had just become the most interesting thing in his city. If this kind of story moves something in you, the kind where the person everyone ignores turns out to be the one who changes everything, then you're exactly where you belong. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us tonight, because what happens to Lena Marlowe over the next few hours is going to stay with you long after it's over. Drop a comment and tell us what city or country you're watching from. We read every single one. Now, let's go back to that lounge. The Blue Meridian was not the kind of place that appeared in travel guides. It sat on the corner of West Huron and a street that Chicago's city planners seemed to have forgotten existed, wedged between a dry cleaner that had been closed for 6 years and a parking structure with 3 of its 4 lights permanently burned out. The sign above the door was missing the letter I, so it read Blue Meridian in faded neon, and nobody had ever bothered to fix it. The clientele preferred anonymity over aesthetics. The bartender, a heavy-set man named Russell, who wore the same flannel shirt 3 nights running, understood that his job was to pour drinks, keep the music low, and pretend not to see things. He was very good at his job. On most nights, the Blue Meridian filled slowly after midnight. People who worked late, people who couldn't sleep, people who had complicated reasons for being somewhere that didn't ask for their names. The booths along the back wall were occupied by figures who spoke in murmurs. The stools at the bar turned over every 40 minutes or so, new faces replacing old ones, and Russell kept the glasses clean and his eyes pointed at the middle distance. Lena Marlowe had been coming here on this same night, at this same hour, for 3 years. She always sat at the same stool, third from the left, close enough to the door to watch it without being obvious, far enough from the back booths that nobody felt crowded. She always ordered the same thing, 1 glass of añejo tequila, no ice, no lime, no salt. She always paid in cash, always left a generous tip, and always stayed for exactly 2 drinks before disappearing back into whatever part of the city she had come from. Russell had stopped trying to figure her out after the first year. Some people came to bars because they wanted company. Some came because they wanted to be alone in a room full of noise. Lena, he had decided, came for neither of those reasons. She came the way a soldier visits a cemetery, not out of grief exactly, but out of obligation, out of memory, out of something that didn't have a clean word attached to it. Tonight she looked the same as she always did, dark hair pulled back without ceremony, a gray jacket that had seen better days, hands wrapped around the glass with a steadiness that Russell, who had watched thousands of people drink thousands of drinks over 22 years behind various bars, recognized immediately as the steadiness of someone who was not actually relaxed at all. Someone whose stillness was a choice, not a default. She was 37 years old and she looked, at a casual glance, like someone's quiet older sister. Someone you'd see at a farmer's market on a Sunday morning, maybe, picking through the tomatoes. Someone you'd forget within a day of meeting them. That was the thing about Lena Marlowe that people consistently failed to account for. She looked forgettable. She had worked very hard to look that way. The anniversary she was marking was not the kind people marked with flowers or phone calls from old friends. 3 years ago tonight, at approximately 2:13 in the morning, Lena had been sitting in a different location in this same city. Not a bar, but a parking garage on South Michigan Avenue, waiting for a man named Gerald Foss to arrive with documents that would have ended her career in emergency response coordination and, more importantly, would have protected 4 people she'd spent 8 months trying to keep alive. Gerald Foss never arrived. What arrived instead was a phone call from her supervisor, a man she had trusted for 6 years, informing her that her credentials had been suspended pending investigation, that her office access had been revoked, that she was to turn in her badge and her identification within 24 hours or law enforcement would be involved. She had sat in that parking garage for 47 minutes after the call ended, not moving, not crying, just running the sequence of events backward through her mind, the way a mechanic disassembles an engine, piece by piece, looking for the point of failure. She found it within the first 10 minutes. The man she had trusted had been the failure all along. She just hadn't seen it in time. The 4 people she'd been protecting had scattered. 2 made it somewhere safe on their own. She'd confirmed that, months later, through channels she was no longer supposed to have access to. 1 disappeared entirely, which could mean anything. The 4th, a woman named Patricia Dunn, 54 years old, retired schoolteacher, the most ordinary-looking person Lena had ever worked to protect, had been found 3 days later in a warehouse on the south side. Patricia Dunn had survived. But survival, Lena had learned, covered an enormous range of conditions. She didn't allow herself to think about Patricia Dunn for more than a few seconds at a time. It was a discipline she had developed the way other people develop the ability to hold their breath, through practice, through failure, through the gradual understanding that some thoughts, if you let them run, would run you straight off a cliff. So she sat at the bar at the Blue Meridian at 2:13 in the morning, 3 years to the date, and she drank her tequila, and she let herself remember just enough to know she hadn't forgotten, and then she put it away again. That was what the anniversary was for. Not grief, not rage, not self-pity, just acknowledgement. I was here, this happened. I'm still here. She raised the glass and took one slow sip and set it back down with the precise care of someone who knows that controlled movement is its own form of discipline. In the mirror behind the bar, cracked at the lower left corner and slightly foxed with age, she watched the room. But she had been watching the room since she walked in. This was not paranoia. It was training, and then habit, and then something that lived below habit, reflex maybe, or just the natural state of a person who had spent years in environments where not watching was the last mistake you ever got to make. She cataloged without appearing to catalog. The couple in the second booth, arguing in low voices about money, real money trouble, not a performance. She could tell by the way the woman's jaw kept tightening on one side. The man at the far end of the bar who had nursed the same beer for 40 minutes, and whose eyes moved to the door every time it opened, waiting for someone, nervous about who it might be. The 2 men near the jukebox who were not listening to the music and had not looked at each other directly once in the 20 minutes they'd been standing there, which meant they were either working together with practiced ease or they'd been working together so long it had become unconscious. And the booth in the far corner, the one Russell kept slightly separate from the others, the one Lena had noticed was never offered to walk-in customers. That booth had been occupied since before she arrived by a presence she had not yet fully resolved into a person. The light back there was deliberately poor. She had clocked it on her first visit 3 years ago and had since treated it the way a good sailor treats a reef marked on a chart, noted, respected, given appropriate distance. She did not know who sat in that booth tonight. She was aware that she did not know, and she filed that awareness next to the other things she was tracking, and she took another sip of her tequila. The door opened. 3 men came in. Bam. Russell saw them first, and the particular quality of the silence that moved through him traveled over the bar top like a vibration in wood. Lena felt it without looking up. She made a small adjustment in her posture, nothing visible, nothing anyone would notice, and tracked them in the mirror. They were the kind of men who use their size the way some people use their voices. Loud. Filling space they hadn't been invited to fill. The one in front, big, mid-40s, wearing a jacket that was too expensive for the rest of him, moved through the bar the way a person moves through a room they've decided belongs to them already. His 2 companions fanned out slightly behind him, not by accident. It was a formation Lena recognized. She had seen it in other contexts, other environments, always with the same underlying grammar. We are looking for something, and we've decided we're going to find it. Their eyes moved across the room with the practiced efficiency of people who sort human beings into categories quickly and act on the sorting. Threat, no threat. Useful, not useful. Worth the attention, not worth the bother. The man in front looked at Lena and made a decision in approximately 4 seconds. She saw it happen in the mirror. He had looked at her and seen, thin woman, alone, quiet, not making eye contact, probably nervous, definitely manageable. A stool at the end of a bar was an isolated position, and isolated positions, to men like this one, were invitations. He was wrong about all of it, but he didn't know that yet. He walked over, and his companions positioned themselves, one slightly behind her, one off to her left, blocking the bar. It was neat work, she noted. They'd done this before. "You're in my seat," he said. His voice had the flat certainty of a man who had never had this particular opening line challenged. Lena looked at her glass. She took a slow breath. She did not look at him. "The stool doesn't have your name on it," she said, "and I've been here for 40 minutes, so." The bar went a particular kind of quiet that Russell recognized and Lena recognized and probably 2 or 3 other people in the room recognized. The quiet that precedes either a backing down or an escalation. The quiet that hangs in the air like the moment before weather. The man in the jacket reached out and put his hand flat on the bar beside her glass. "I wasn't asking," he said. This was the moment. Lena had been in rooms where violence was about to happen so many times that she had developed a finely calibrated sense of it. Not the kind of violence that erupted from nowhere, from blind rage or pure accident, but the kind that moved in stages, that gave you signals if you knew what to read. This man was in stage 2. Stage 1 had been the approach. Stage 2 was the display of dominance without direct contact. Stage 3 would be contact. Stage 4 would be whatever he decided stage 4 was. She had until the end of stage 2 to determine which of several possible responses was most appropriate, and she had to do it without escalating to a stage he hadn't chosen, and she had to do it without giving him anything he could mistake for fear, because fear, she had learned this a long time ago, in circumstances considerably more serious than this bar, was the thing that moved men like this one from stage 2 to stage 3 faster than anything else. She was not afraid. She was, in fact, running a very precise internal calculation. She turned her head and looked at him for the first time. She had practiced this look. It was not aggressive and it was not submissive. It was the look of someone who is paying very close attention to a situation and has already understood more about it than the other person realizes. It was the look of a doctor reading a chart or an engineer looking at a structure she has already assessed for load tolerance. "You're going to want to walk away," she said. The words were quiet. They were not a threat. They were the most honest thing she had said all evening. The man stared at her. I was trying to process the fact that he had not received any of the expected responses. No flinching, no apologizing, no reaching for her purse to move. What he had received instead was a calm woman telling him something, and he could not immediately tell if she was stupid or crazy or something else that he didn't have a word for yet. He decided she was stupid. He reached out and flipped her glass. It hit the bar surface, and the tequila spread in a slow amber pool, and the glass rolled toward the edge, and Russell caught it before it fell, because Russell had reflexes built from 2 decades of exactly these moments. And the sound of it, that particular crack of something being knocked over by someone who wants you to know they're capable of worse, went through the bar like a signal fire. Lena looked at the spreading liquid. She looked back at the man. Something crossed her face then. Not anger, not surprise. Something that was very nearly its opposite, a settling. The way a person looks when something they had been quietly preparing for has finally, inevitably arrived. "Okay," she said. In the booth at the back of the bar, Adrian Valenti leaned forward slightly. Just slightly. Just enough that the man sitting across from him, his second, a compact and watchful person named Marco, who had been with him for 11 years, noticed the movement and said nothing, because Marco had learned to read the signals Adrian gave in the same way a sailor learns to read the color of a sky. Adrian was watching. That meant everything else could wait. He had come to the Blue Meridian tonight for a reason that had nothing to do with thin women drinking alone at the bar. He had come because the Blue Meridian existed in a particular nexus of Chicago's underground geography. Not his territory, not his enemy's territory, but a neutral seam between the two. The kind of place where information moved freely because everyone in it had roughly equal reasons for discretion. He came here 3 or 4 times a year to listen, which was a thing that powerful men rarely did well, and that Adrian had always considered one of his most significant advantages over them. He had walked in tonight expecting to spend 2 hours listening and leave with a clear picture of several things he needed clarity on. He had not expected this. He watched the man in the jacket flip the woman's glass, and felt something that he identified, after a moment, as irritation. Not moral outrage. Adrian Valenti had long ago made peace with the fact that the world contained a great deal of behavior he found distasteful, and that managing his own responses to it was more productive than being distracted by it. But there was something about the particular quality of the woman's stillness that the act of flipping the glass had interrupted, and the interruption bothered him the way a wrong note in an otherwise coherent piece of music bothers a person with a good ear. She had been doing something at that bar. He wasn't sure what it was. He wanted to keep watching. "Stay," he said to Marco, who had shifted slightly in preparation to move. Marco settled back. Adrian watched. The man in the jacket had expected the spilled tequila to produce results. A gasp, a backward movement, tears, the particular collapse of composure that he had learned to use as a starting point for whatever came next. He got none of it. He got a woman who looked at the spreading liquid and then looked back at him and said, "Okay," in the tone of voice a surgeon uses when she's confirmed a diagnosis. "You're going to want to sit somewhere else," he said. He put both hands on the bar now, leaning in, filling the space above her. Lena looked at the hands. She looked at the man to her left, who had moved slightly closer. She looked at the man behind her, whose position she had tracked without turning her head, whose shadow she could see in the foxed surface of the mirror. She made a decision. "Your name is Jimmy Caruso," she said. "You run a collection operation out of a body shop on West Division that isn't actually a body shop. The man on my left is either your brother or your cousin. The bone structure around the jaw is almost identical. And the one behind me I've never seen before, but based on how he's positioned himself, he's newer than the other two, and he's waiting for you to give him a signal before he does anything, which means he's still trying to impress you." The bar was absolutely silent. Jimmy Caruso stared at her. She picked up a cocktail napkin from the holder at the edge of the bar and began blotting the spilled tequila with the systematic care of someone performing a small and necessary task. "I know who you are," she said, without looking up. "Because 3 months ago, a woman named Cecilia Moran came to me after you sent 2 of your people to her apartment to collect on a debt that wasn't hers. She showed me photographs. One of them had a partial plate number and enough of a background that I was able to identify the body shop. I passed that information to someone who is in a position to act on it, and they are currently deciding whether to do so." She set the napkin down. She looked at Jimmy Caruso directly. "I'm telling you this not to threaten you," she said, "but so you understand that whatever you're planning to do next, you should factor it in. I'm not someone you want to make a problem of yourself." The silence in the bar had a texture to it now, not the thin, waiting silence of before, but something denser, more complicated. The couple in the second booth had stopped arguing. The man at the far end of the bar was not looking at the door anymore. Jimmy Caruso's face had gone through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise. Recalibration. Something that wanted to be anger but wasn't entirely sure of itself. He pointed at her. "You have no idea. I know what Cecilia Moran's left cheekbone looks like 6 weeks after the fact," Lena said. "I know what that kind of injury costs a woman who can't afford to miss 2 weeks of work. I know the name of the debt you said she owed, and I know whose name it was actually in, and I know that you knew that when you sent your people to her door." She folded the cocktail napkin once, neatly, and placed it beside the empty spot where her glass had been. "Go home," she said. "Don't come back here. If I see you again, the decision about whether to act on that information gets made." Something passed between Jimmy Caruso and the man to Lena's left. A look, fast and complex, the kind of communication that exists between people who have known each other long enough to speak without words. Lena caught it in her peripheral vision and read it correctly. It was the look of 2 people who have just been surprised by someone they expected to be helpless, and who are now deciding whether their surprise is reason enough to change their plan. It was the most dangerous 10 seconds of the encounter. She did not move. She did not tense. She kept her hands loose and her breathing even, and she looked at Jimmy Caruso with the full weight of her attention and gave him absolutely nothing to read in her face except the information she had already given him. He made a decision. He stepped back. 1 step. Then 2. "This isn't over," he said, because men like Jimmy Caruso always said something when they left, and this was the something he chose. "It is for tonight," Lena said. She turned back to the bar. She nodded at Russell, who had appeared from somewhere with a clean glass and a fresh pour of añejo tequila that she had not asked for and that she understood immediately as the only form of solidarity available to him in this particular context. "Thank you, Russell," she said. "Don't mention it," he said, in a voice that meant precisely what it said. She picked up the glass. Her hand was completely steady. Jimmy Caruso and his companions left the Blue Meridian at 2:31 in the morning. Lena tracked their exit in the mirror without appearing to. She noted the order in which they went through the door, which told her something about hierarchy. She noted that the newer man glanced back once before the door closed, which told her he was either curious or still thinking about whether a different choice should have been made. She filed both observations in the part of her mind where she kept things she might need later and returned her attention to the present moment. The bar exhaled. People resumed the conversations they had paused. The jukebox, which had apparently been playing something during the entire confrontation that nobody had been listening to, made itself audible again. Something slow and from another decade, a trumpet carrying a melody that sounded like it was remembering something it had once lost. Lena drank her tequila. She was aware that the room was calibrating her now, looking, assessing, revising its initial reading of the thin, quiet woman at the bar. She had not wanted this. She had come here tonight to be unremarkable, to occupy her stool and her glass and her private anniversary, and then leave without having impacted anyone's evening. She had not wanted to be the woman who knew Jimmy Caruso's name and his operation and his methods. She had not wanted to be anything tonight except present. But Cecilia Moran's face had been in her memory since the moment she saw Jimmy Caruso walk through the door, and when he stood over her with his hands flat on the bar, she had made a calculation, and the calculation had produced a choice, and she had made the choice, and now here she was, visible in a place where she had worked very hard to be invisible. She drank the rest of the tequila in one slow movement. She set the glass down. She sat with the question that always followed moments like this one, the question she never answered cleanly, the question that constituted, if she was being honest with herself, the central unresolved argument of her life. Was it worth it? Not in the abstract, not as philosophy. In the specific, granular, consequential sense. Was the calculation sound? Was the risk proportionate? Was the outcome? Jimmy Caruso's humiliation and temporary retreat, the information about Cecilia Moran now having been spoken out loud in a room with witnesses, the fact that a small and specific injustice had been, if not corrected, at least complicated, was all of that worth having made herself visible? She didn't know. She almost never knew afterward. That was the part nobody told you about, when you were still young enough to think that doing the right thing was its own sufficient reward. Nobody told you about the afterward, the doubt, the accounting, the sitting alone at a bar at 2:31 in the morning trying to determine whether you had made things better or simply made things. She was so deep in this particular thought that she almost missed it. Almost. In the mirror, she caught movement from the back of the bar. Not threatening movement, not the quick, purposeful movement of someone heading for the door. This was slower, considered. The movement of someone who had decided to do something and was taking their time doing it. A man was walking toward her. He was tall. Not in the way that announces itself, not the kind of tall that seems to be trying to make a point, but quietly and substantially tall, the way certain buildings are tall. You notice it primarily because things line up differently around him. Dark clothing, expensive but not showy. Dark hair, silver starting at the temples. A face that had once been very handsome and had aged into something more interesting. The kind of face that had been used, that had made decisions and absorbed consequences and come through carrying the evidence. He moved like someone who was accustomed to rooms making way for him. But the thing that Lena noticed, the thing she cataloged in the first 2 seconds, was that he was not using that. He was walking across the bar at the pace of someone who was going somewhere specific and had no particular need to be observed doing it. He sat down at the stool beside hers, the stool that Jimmy Caruso had so recently vacated. He nodded at Russell, who produced a glass of something amber without being asked, set it down without being spoken to, and found pressing business at the other end of the bar with the efficiency of a man who understood his role precisely. The man beside Lena did not look at her. He picked up his glass. He looked straight ahead at the mirror. In the mirror, his eyes found hers. "That was well done," he said. His voice was low and even. Not the flatness of someone suppressing emotion. The evenness of someone who had spent many years determining exactly how much of themselves to put into a given sentence and had arrived at a precise calibration. Lena looked at his reflection. "I wasn't asking for an audience," she said. "No," he said. "You weren't." A pause. He drank. She watched him drink. He had the same quality of controlled movement she had noticed in the mirror when he crossed the room. Nothing wasted, Nothing performed. Jimmy Caruso is going to think about what happened here tonight for a while, he said. Men like that don't forget when they've been assessed accurately. It unsettles them in ways that straightforward confrontation doesn't. I know, Lena said. It may create a problem for you. I know that too. He turned his head and looked at her directly for the first time, not the appraising look of the men who had stood over her 20 minutes ago. The look that sorted and categorized and made decisions about what something was worth. A different kind of look. The look of someone trying to understand something they hadn't been able to understand from a distance. Why did you do it? He asked. It was a genuine question. She could hear that. Not rhetorical, not provocative, genuine. Lena looked at her glass. Because Cecilia Moran had to pay $300 she didn't have to have her cheekbone looked at, she said. And Jimmy Caruso had a good evening after that, and another good evening, and another one. And tonight was the first time the accounting was different. She paused. Someone has to keep a different set of books, she said. The man beside her was quiet for a moment. That's a dangerous philosophy, he said. Most useful philosophies are. He almost smiled. She saw it happen at the edge of his mouth. Not quite, but almost. The arrival and departure of something that might have been amusement or might have been recognition. My name is Adrian, he said. He didn't offer a last name. Lena looked at him for a long moment. She had been in enough rooms with enough dangerous people to know what kind of gravity Adrian carried. It was not like Jimmy Caruso's gravity, not the gravity of a man who used force because force was the only language available to him. This was something different, something more deliberate. Something that had been constructed over a long period of time by someone who understood exactly what they were building. She knew who he was. She had known since approximately 40 seconds after she walked into the Blue Meridian tonight and clocked the booth in the back corner and the particular quality of the space around it, the way the other occupants of the bar oriented themselves in subtle relationship to that booth, the way iron filings orient to a magnet, not looking at it, but always aware of it. She had known, and she had made a decision to know, and simultaneously to file the knowledge away and treat this man as background information rather than present reality. Because the alternative, treating him as present reality, treating the Mafia king of Chicago as a relevant fact in her evening, was a kind of complication she had not been prepared to introduce into a night that was supposed to be private and controlled, and hers. And then Jimmy Caruso had walked through the door, and the evening had stopped being controlled. And now Adrian Valenti was sitting beside her. Lena, she said, no last name. He accepted this with the small nod of someone who understood the grammar of it. They sat in silence for a moment, two people at a bar at 2:35 in the morning, looking at the cracked mirror and the room reflected in it and whatever it was each of them saw there. The tequila, he said finally. What's the occasion? She looked at her glass. The kind you don't celebrate, she said. The kind you just mark. He was quiet. He did not press. He did not offer condolences or curiosity or the various forms of conversational intrusion that most people defaulted to when faced with a statement they didn't fully understand. He just nodded, once, in a way that said, I understand the kind of thing that gets marked instead of celebrated. And somehow, in the way that the smallest recognitions can be more disorienting than the largest provocations, it was that single, quiet nod that made Lena Marlowe finally look directly at Adrian Valenti in the cracked mirror of the Blue Meridian at 2:36 in the morning and feel the first faint shift in the structure of an evening she had thought she had completely under control. She finished her tequila. She set the glass down with the same precise care she always used. She put her money on the bar with the generous tip that was part of the ritual, and she put on her jacket, which she had folded over the stool beside her and which Adrian had not touched despite there being nowhere else obvious to put anything. She stood. Thank you for the drink, she said. She had not accepted a drink from him. She had not asked for one. But something in the structure of the evening made the courtesy seem necessary regardless. He looked at her. Be careful, he said. Not as an instruction, not as a warning, more like information being offered by someone who had reason to offer it. Lena looked at him for 3 full seconds. You too, she said. And she walked out of the Blue Meridian and into the cold Chicago rain, and the door closed behind her, and the night received her back without ceremony. Adrian Valenti sat at the bar for another 20 minutes. He did not speak. He did not signal to Marco. He looked at the mirror and the empty stool where Lena had been and turned the evening over in his mind with the systematic thoroughness he applied to everything that mattered. He had been running Chicago's most significant criminal enterprise for 11 years. In 11 years, he had met exactly two kinds of people: people who wanted something from him and people who were afraid of him, often both at once. Lena Marlowe had wanted nothing from him. She had not been afraid of him. She had sat beside him and drunk her tequila and answered his questions with the precision of someone who had thought carefully about what to say and said exactly that. And she had looked at him, really looked at him, the way almost nobody did, because almost nobody had the stillness required to look at someone like Adrian Valenti without flinching or calculating or performing. And she had said, "You too," and walked out into the rain. He turned to Marco. "Find out who she is," he said. Marco had his phone out before the sentence was finished. "Everything," Adrian said. He finished his drink. Outside, the Chicago rain continued its indifferent work on the city. Somewhere in it, a thin woman in a gray jacket was walking through streets she had learned to navigate alone, marking an anniversary that no one else knew about, carrying a weight that she had decided 3 years ago she would carry without complaint and without performance and without allowing it to become something that bent her. Adrian Valenti, in the shadows of a bar that smelled of old wood and cigarettes long extinguished, decided that he wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand how a person learned to carry something like that. He wanted to understand the woman who had looked at Jimmy Caruso's hands flat on the bar and said, "Okay," in the tone of someone who had already won. He wanted to understand, and the wanting was unfamiliar, and the unfamiliarity was, he identified this with some surprise, not unpleasant. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He nodded once at Russell, who nodded back with the discretion of 22 years and the particular respect you showed people who didn't need to be seen, but whose presence you felt. He walked out into the rain. The city was quiet in the way that cities are quiet at nearly 3 in the morning. Not silent, never silent, but lower, slower, the daytime urgency gone, and something else in its place. Something that had to do with time passing and things persisting and the particular endurance of places that have absorbed more history than any single person can carry. He stood on the corner for a moment. He looked in the direction she had gone. And then Adrian Valenti, the most feared man in Chicago, a man who had not been surprised by anything in longer than he could accurately remember, walked back to his car with the faint, uncomfortable, oddly clarifying awareness that the evening had not gone the way he expected, and that the reason it hadn't was a woman he had watched drink tequila alone for precisely 23 minutes before Jimmy Caruso walked in and showed him something he hadn't been looking for. Something that looked like strength in a package the world had consistently decided to ignore. He made a note of it. He made several notes. And somewhere on the other side of the city, in a small apartment that she kept clean and sparse and ready to leave at short notice, Lena Marlowe hung up her gray jacket and stood at her window for a moment in the dark, watching the rain move across the glass. She did not think about Adrian Valenti. She thought about Cecilia Moran and Patricia Dunn and the 4 people from 3 years ago and the accounting that never fully balanced, and the particular discipline required to continue keeping a different set of books in a city that ran mostly on the standard ones. She stood at the window until the rain slowed. Then she went to bed. She slept without dreaming, which was the best she ever hoped for. Outside, Chicago continued being Chicago. Vast, cold, layered, carrying its dead and its living with equal indifference, moving through the last hours of the night toward a morning that would bring with it whatever it was going to bring. The Blue Meridian's broken sign flickered once in the wind and went dark. At 2:13 in the morning, a woman had drunk tequila alone, and the Mafia boss who had watched her would spend the next 72 hours discovering that the most dangerous thing about Lena Marlowe was not what she knew, or what she had done, or what she was capable of. It was that she had spent 3 years becoming someone nobody saw coming, and she had no idea yet what that was about to cost her. The morning after the Blue Meridian came in gray and cold, the kind of Chicago morning that doesn't so much arrive as accumulate, pressure building in the low sky, the lake smell coming in off the water and settling into the streets like something that had never left. Lena was awake before the light changed. She had been awake for 40 minutes already, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, going through the previous night with the systematic attention she gave to anything that had produced unexpected variables. Jimmy Caruso was a variable. Adrian Valenti was a considerably larger one. She had known who he was before she said her name to him. She had known, and she had told herself it didn't matter, that the context was narrow, and the contact was minimal, and that she had moved through the city for 3 years by maintaining exactly this kind of discipline, knowing when to register something and when to let it pass through without anchoring it to anything that could pull her off course. She was good at that. She had made herself good at it. She picked up the coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. The apartment was small and organized in the specific way of someone who had learned that attachment to objects was a liability. One bookshelf, books arranged by function rather than sentiment. A small table with 2 chairs, though she never had anyone to sit in the second one. A window that faced north, which meant she got the light in the late afternoon but not the morning, which she preferred. Morning light had a quality that felt like exposure, and she had always worked better in shadow. She put the cup down. She thought about what Marco, or whoever Adrian sent, would find when they looked for her. They would find Lena Marlowe, 37, currently employed as an independent safety consultant for a nonprofit that provided basic security assessments to organizations operating in high-risk neighborhood environments. They would find a woman who had no criminal record, no outstanding debts, no traceable affiliations. They would find her previous employment, Regional Emergency Response Coordinator, terminated 3 years ago pending investigation. Investigation subsequently closed without public findings. And they would note the gap between what that job had been and what she did now. And they would either understand the gap or they wouldn't. She hoped they didn't understand it fully. Full understanding in Adrian Valenti's world had a way of making people useful to him, and useful was a category she could not afford to inhabit. She stood up. She washed the cup. She put on her jacket. She had 3 appointments today. None of them were the kind of appointments that appeared in a calendar. The first was in Pilsen, in the back room of a bakery run by a woman named Gloria Reyes, who was 61 years old and had been operating the bakery for 30 years and had, for the past 8 months, been receiving visits from a man representing a property development company that was systematically acquiring the Block 1 building at a time. Gloria had refused to sell. The visits had become less conversational in recent weeks. Lena arrived at 7:15. Gloria was already behind the counter, flour on her forearms, her reading glasses pushed up into the gray at her temples. She was a compact, precise woman who moved with the efficiency of someone who had been getting up at 4 in the morning for 30 years and had long since stopped resenting it. She looked up when Lena came in, and her expression did the thing it always did. A combination of relief and the particular guilt that came from needing help and not wanting to need it. "He came again," Gloria said before Lena could say anything. "When?" "Last night, late, after I closed." She set down the thing she was holding, a pastry brush, small and slightly worn, and folded her hands on the counter. "He didn't knock this time. He came around to the back, just stood there, by the door, for maybe 10 minutes. Then he left. He wanted you to see him." "I know that." Gloria's jaw tightened. "I know what he wanted." Lena nodded. She moved to the back of this bakery, through the kitchen that smelled of sugar and yeast and something underneath those smells that was older and harder to name, and she checked the back door and the small window above the sink and the lock on the storage room. She looked at the ground outside the back door, where the concrete was slightly discolored from an old water stain, and she noted the angle of sight from the alley. She came back to the counter. "I want you to put a second lock on the back door," she said. "I'll give you the contact for the person who does it, and I want you to tell your daughter that when she closes up on Thursdays, she doesn't do it alone." "My daughter thinks I should sell." "I know." "She might be right." Lena looked at her. "Is that what you want?" Gloria was quiet for a moment. She picked up the pastry brush. She set it down again. "No," she said. "It's not what I want." "Then let me do what I can do," Lena said, "and let's take it a week at a time." Gloria nodded. She didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded, and that was enough for now. Lena took the coffee that Gloria poured without asking and drank it standing at the counter, and they talked about other things for a few minutes. Gloria's granddaughter, the weather, a movie Gloria had seen on television last week that she wanted to recommend, and that Lena would probably never watch. And then Lena said goodbye and went back out into the gray morning. She was 3 blocks away when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She let it ring twice, then answered. "You left without finishing your drink," the voice said. It was a voice she recognized immediately, even and low, carrying something underneath it that was neither warmth nor coldness, but something that occupied the space between them. Lena kept walking. "I finished 2 drinks," she said. "That's my limit." "I'd like to talk to you," Adrian said. "You're talking to me." "In person." She stopped at the corner. A truck moved through the intersection, its brakes producing a long mechanical sound that the morning absorbed without comment. "About what?" she said. "About a number of things. Some of them may interest you." "Give me one." A pause. Long enough to be considered, short enough not to be manipulative. "Cecilia Moran," he said. "Jimmy Caruso has been making phone calls this morning." Lena's grip on the phone tightened by a fraction. Not enough for anyone watching her to see. Barely enough for her to register herself. "Where?" she said. "Somewhere I'd rather not discuss on a phone." She stood at the corner and looked at the truck moving away down the street and ran the same calculation she had run 6 hours earlier in a different context. Probability, consequence, what the various responses led to, and what they cost. "Tonight," she said, 7 o'clock, the coffee place on Wicker Park Avenue, across from the park. "I know it." "I'm sure you do," she said. She hung up. She stood at the corner for another 15 seconds, not moving, watching the space where the truck had been. Then she kept walking. By noon she had spoken to 4 more people. A man named Darius, who managed a community center that had been having its donations interfered with. A teenager named Marco, not Adrian's Marco, a different one, 16 years old, wire-thin and watchful, who had witnessed something 3 weeks ago that he shouldn't have witnessed and had been living in a specific kind of fear since. A woman who went by the name Bet, 50s, who ran an informal network of apartment subletting for people who couldn't appear on a lease for various legitimate reasons, and whose database Lena occasionally needed access to. And a retired police officer named Henderson, who Lena had known for years and who, despite everything that had happened and everything he knew about how her career had ended, still answered her calls. "You're moving around a lot today," Henderson said. They were on the phone. He had been retired for 2 years and he'd moved to a smaller apartment on the north side, and he generally sounded like a man who had made peace with the distance between what he'd hoped his career would accomplish and what it had actually accomplished. Today, he sounded more alert than usual. "I always move around," Lena said. "Somebody put your name through the system this morning." She stopped. She was standing on a sidewalk outside a laundromat, and the sound of machines through the glass was a steady, indifferent hum. "When?" she said. "Around 6 a.m. wasn't official. It was a query through a back channel we used to use for informal checks. Someone called in a favor." "What channel?" "The kind where the favor goes to someone who used to work organized crime task force," Henderson said. "Before you ask, I don't know who's on the other end. Whoever called it in covered that part." Lena pressed her back lightly against the laundromat window. 6 a.m. That meant within 3 hours of her leaving the Blue Meridian. Adrian's people were thorough. "Did you pull anything for them?" she said. "No," Henderson said. "I'm retired." "But you heard about it." "I still know people," he said. "Lena." He paused, and the pause carried the weight of a man deciding how much to say. "What happened last night?" "Nothing significant. Something significant enough that somebody with organized crime connections ran your name through a back channel at 6 in the morning." She was quiet. "It wasn't hostile," she said finally. "It was informational." "That's not as reassuring as you seem to think it is." "I know," she said. "I'm handling it." "You're always handling it," Henderson said. "That's the part that worries me." She didn't have an answer for that. She said goodbye and put the phone in her pocket and stood outside the laundromat for a moment, listening to the machines, thinking about the particular loneliness of being someone whose reassurances worried the people who cared about them. Then she went to her next appointment. The coffee place on Wicker Park Avenue was called something French that nobody used. People called it the corner place, or the one with the green awning, or, in the case of the people who came for the back corner table by the window that was slightly removed from the rest of the room and had a sight line to the door. They didn't call it anything at all. They just came to it. Lena arrived at 6:47. Adrian arrived at 6:59, which told her something about the kind of man he was. Not early, not late. The arrival of someone who managed time the way they managed everything else, with control that didn't need to perform itself. He sat down across from her. He looked, in the ordinary light of a coffee shop, somewhat different from how he had looked in the blue meridian's deliberate shadow. The silver at his temples was more visible. There was a small, old scar at the left corner of his jaw that she hadn't clocked the night before. He was wearing a different coat, darker, simpler, and he carried nothing except his phone, which he placed face down on the table when he sat, a gesture she noted. "Cecilia Moran," she said, before he could open with anything. He looked at her with the expression of a man who was not entirely surprised to be skipped to the point. "Jimmy Caruso called 3 people this morning," he said. "2 of them are in his organization. One of them is someone I've been watching for a different reason." What he said, roughly, was that a woman interfered in his business last night, and he wants to know who she is and where she lives. Lena wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "And the person you've been watching for a different reason," she said. "What did they say back?" "Nothing useful to Caruso. Something useful to me." He paused. "He mentioned your name." "He knew my name." "He knew more than your name," Adrian said. "He knew your previous employment. He knew you'd been terminated. He knew you've been operating in certain neighborhoods since then in what he called an informal capacity." His voice was even, delivering information, not editorializing. "He called you a nuisance." "That's familiar?" "He also called you manageable." The word landed differently than the others. Lena kept her expression neutral. "And the person you've been watching gave Caruso all of this," she said. "He did. Which means he either already had it or he was well positioned to find it quickly." "Yes." "Who is he?" Adrian looked at her steadily. "His name is Vincent Caro. He's been inside Jimmy Caruso's operation for about 14 months. Before that, he worked for a woman named Serena Volkov, who runs a competing enterprise primarily on the south and southwest sides." He folded his hands on the table. 14 months ago, Caro left Volkov's organization under circumstances that I believed, at the time, were straightforward. A dispute over compensation. It happens. But now you think he was planted. "Now I think the dispute was constructed," Adrian said. "And I think the last 14 months have been an investment in exactly the kind of positioning that allowed him to answer Caruso's call this morning within the hour." Lena was quiet. She looked at him across the table. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because Caro mentioned your name to Caruso," he said. "And Caruso is now motivated, and the combination of a motivated Jimmy Caruso with information provided by someone operating on Serena Volkov's behalf creates a specific kind of problem. A problem for me. Potentially. And you have an interest in that because, Adrian said, with a deliberateness that made every word carry more weight. "I don't know what Serena Volkov is building toward, but I know she's building toward something. And last night I watched you read a room in under 60 seconds and handle a situation that most people in this city would have handled badly. And I don't think it's useful for someone like you to become a problem that Jimmy Caruso's organization is solving on Serena Volkov's timetable." The coffee shop hummed around them. Someone near the door laughed at something, the sudden bright sound of it cutting through the ambient noise and then dissolving. Lena looked at her cup. "What do you want?" she said. "Right now," he said. "Nothing. I'm telling you what I know because the alternative is you walking around this city without information that directly affects your safety, and that seems inefficient. And later." "Later is later," he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them looked away. "I'm not an asset," she said. "I'm not something you recruit. I've been recruited before and I know what it looks like and I'm not interested." "I know," he said. "You know because you had someone run my background this morning." "I did," he said, without apology. "What did you find?" "That you were very good at your job," he said. "That someone made sure you couldn't do it anymore. That the person who made sure of that had financial relationships with people I know, which is information I'm going to look into further." He paused. "And that you've been doing the same work, essentially, with no institutional support and no protection and no salary, for 3 years. Lena said nothing. "I found that interesting," he said. "People find a lot of things interesting," she said. "That doesn't obligate me." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." They were quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the park across the street was dark. the trees bare and black against the lighter darkness of the sky, the streetlights making yellow pools on the wet pavement. Tell me about the financial relationships, Lena said. The person who terminated your employment, Adrian said. A man named Gerald Foss? Lena's expression didn't change. Nothing on her surface changed, but something in the quality of her attention shifted, became sharper, became the kind of sharp that has an edge. Had, at the time of your termination, an arrangement with a construction holding company registered in Delaware, Adrian said. The holding company had 3 partners. One of them had business relationships with a man who no longer exists, for reasons I won't specify. Another is currently— Who's the third? Lena said. Her voice was flat. He looked at her. A woman named Serena Volkov, he said. The coffee shop continued its indifferent ambient life around them. Someone ordered something at the counter. The machine made its noise. A chair scraped. The music that Lena had not been consciously registering played a few notes she didn't recognize and moved on to the next ones. Lena sat with what she had just been told. She sat with it the way she had learned to sit with things that needed to be processed before they could be felt. Not suppressing it exactly, but containing it, holding it in a temporary space where it could exist without immediately affecting the quality of her thinking. Gerald Foss. Serena Volkov. 3 years ago, the parking garage. The phone call. The 53 minutes of sitting in the dark and running the sequence backward. She had found the point of failure. She had not found, until this moment, the reason for it. How long have you known this? She said. Since approximately 8 o'clock this morning, he said. She looked at him. If you had found it earlier, she said, you wouldn't have told me. He met her gaze. He did not look away. He did not give her an easy reassurance. Probably not, he said. She respected that more than she would have respected the alternative. Patricia Dunn, she said. He looked at her steadily. The woman I was protecting, Lena said. 3 years ago, the one who ended up. She stopped. She recalibrated. Did Volkov have a reason to want that specific case obstructed? Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Nothing so simple. Something more complicated. The expression of a man who was in the process of understanding something and didn't like what the understanding cost him. I don't know, he said. I'll find out. Don't do me favors, she said sharply. I'm not, he said, equally sharp. I'm doing it because if Serena Volkov's activities 3 years ago connect to her current positioning against my organization, then the information has value to me regardless of what it means to you. The sharpness hung between them. Then it settled. Okay, Lena said. Okay, he said. She picked up her coffee. She set it down again without drinking. You said Caruso is motivated, she said. How motivated? Motivated enough that I'd recommend you don't go back to your apartment tonight, Adrian said. Lena went very still, not the stillness of shock. She had anticipated something like this since the phone call this morning, had been running it as a probability in the background of every interaction since. But hearing it stated, flatly, by someone who had reason to know what he was talking about, moved it from probability to reality in a way that produced its own particular weight. He's that sure of Caro's information, she said. Caro gave him your name, your previous employer, and your current neighborhood, Adrian said. Caruso's people know this city. They can reduce a neighborhood to 6 or 7 blocks in an hour. She was quiet. I have people I look after, she said. I have commitments. I know, he said. I can't just— I know, he said again, and the repetition was not dismissive, but something else. The repetition of someone who has heard the objection and is not asking the person to abandon what they're committed to, but is trying to find a way through the problem that accounts for it. She looked at him. If I stay somewhere else tonight, she said, it needs to be somewhere that doesn't connect me to you, because if I'm connected to you, the problem gets substantially larger. Yes, he said. Do you have a suggestion that satisfies that condition? He thought for a moment. There's an apartment on Huron, building managed by someone I trust. The name on the lease has no connection to me or any of my organizations. You'd be completely isolated. Lena said nothing. It's not a trap, he said. I know it's not a trap, she said. I know that because trapping me doesn't serve your interests right now. That's not the same as trust. No, he agreed. It's not. She looked out the window at the dark park. She thought about her apartment. The bookshelf arranged by function. The two chairs. The window that faced north and gave her the afternoon light. 3 years of building something minimal and functional, and hers. Something she could leave at short notice, but had still, somehow, in the small and specific ways that people always do despite themselves, allowed to become home. "I need to make 2 calls first," she said. "Take your time," he said. She pushed her chair back and walked to the far end of the coffee shop and stood by the wall and called Gloria Reyes first, and then she called Henderson, and by the time she came back, Adrian was still at the table, his phone still face down, his coffee untouched, watching the rain that had begun outside the window with the focused attention of someone who was not watching the rain at all. She sat down. "All right," she said. He nodded. He didn't say anything unnecessary. She looked at him across the table. "I need to be clear about something," she said. "Go ahead." "Whatever this is," she said, "whatever the next 24 hours look like, I'm not yours. I'm not your employee, I'm not your liability, and I'm not something you've acquired. I'm someone who is temporarily using a resource that serves my interests as well as yours. The moment it stops serving my interests, I walk." He looked at her. "Understood," he said. "You said that very easily." "Because it's the only reasonable position," he said, "and I generally prefer dealing with reasonable positions." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in the architecture of the evening had shifted without her entirely deciding to let it shift. She could feel it. The way you feel a change in the weather before you see it, the pressure differential, the air carrying information that hasn't yet declared itself as weather, but is unmistakably preparing to. She had come here tonight intending to receive information and assess it, and make a decision based on probability and consequence, the same calculation she always made, the same discipline she had spent 3 years making into something close to reflex. She had received the information. The information included Gerald Foss's name and Serena Volkov's name in the same sentence. The information included the understanding that her apartment was currently being reduced to a 6-block radius by Jimmy Caruso's people. The information included the fact that a woman she had spent 8 months trying to protect had been made vulnerable 3 years ago, not by accident or by the ordinary grinding cruelty of the city, but by a specific decision made by a specific person who was now maneuvering against the man sitting across from her. She had made her decision. She didn't like it. She made it anyway. "Let's go," she said. She stood. She put on her jacket. She picked it up her bag. Outside, the rain had found its full weight, and Chicago was receiving it the way it received everything. Without complaint, without ceremony, the streets going dark and wet, and the lights of the city reflecting up from the pavement in broken, rearranged versions of themselves. Lena walked out of the coffee shop with the man she had watched from a distance for 7 hours and known about for 3 years. And the door closed behind them, and the city closed around them. And somewhere across town in an apartment that smelled of 3 years of her life, 2 of Jimmy Caruso's people were trying a door. The apartment on Huron Street was on the 4th floor of a building that had no doorman and no cameras in the lobby, which Lena noted and approved of. The elevator was slow and smelled of old metal and someone's takeout from earlier in the evening. She rode it without speaking. Adrian stood beside her with the particular stillness of a man who had learned that silence in close quarters was not a social failure but a form of respect, and she gave him credit for that without saying so. The apartment itself was clean and spare and had the quality of a place that was regularly maintained but never truly lived in. The furniture chosen for function, the surfaces clear, a kitchen stocked with the basics and nothing personal. 1 bedroom, 1 main room, windows facing the street. She walked the perimeter of it in the first 90 seconds, checking the window locks, the door, the bathroom, the small closet in the hallway. Adrian watched her do this from the center of the main room without commenting. "The building manager," she said, coming back to the main room. "His name is Okafor. He's been with me for 9 years. Has he ever been approached by anyone working for Volkov? Not to my knowledge." "That's not the same as no." "No," Adrian said. "It isn't." She stood at the window and looked at the street below. The rain had eased to something thinner, more persistent, the kind that didn't announce itself but accumulated. The street was mostly empty. A car moved through the intersection at the end of the block, its headlights sweeping the wet pavement, and was gone. "My laptop is in my apartment," she said. "We can get it tomorrow." "There are files on it that aren't backed up anywhere." He looked at her. "Files about the people you help," he said. "Yes." "Encrypted." "Of course." Then it can wait until tomorrow, he said. I'll have someone go in first to make sure Caruso's people aren't still watching. She turned from the window. She looked at him standing in the center of this room that belonged to neither of them, in the particular light of a single lamp that made the shadows long and specific. Go home, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Not dramatically, just the small movement of someone mildly surprised. I'm fine, she said. I've been in worse positions than this, and I've been in them alone. I don't need monitoring. I wasn't planning to monitor you. Then what were you planning? He was quiet for a moment. An honest moment, she thought. The pause of someone who was deciding whether to say the thing that was actually true or the thing that was easier. I wanted to make sure you were settled, he said. I'm settled, she said. Thank you for the apartment. I'll be in touch tomorrow. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once and put on his coat and left. She listened to the elevator descend. Then she sat down on the floor with her back against the couch. Not the couch itself, the floor, the specific solidity of it. And she put her head back and she closed her eyes and she allowed herself for exactly 4 minutes to feel the full weight of the evening. Gerald Foss and Serena Volkov. The same sentence. She had spent 3 years believing her career had been ended by institutional cowardice, by a supervisor who had been more afraid of the powerful people she was threatening than he was committed to the work they were supposed to be doing together. She had built an entire architecture of understanding around that belief. The anger she had processed and managed and eventually converted into something functional. The drive that got her out of bed before dawn and kept her moving through the city, looking after people nobody else was looking after. All of it had been built on the premise that Gerald Foss was a coward. Cowardice she could understand. Cowardice she had metabolized. Conspiracy was something different. If Gerald Foss had been paid, if his decision to terminate her and destroy her credibility had been a financial transaction rather than a failure of character, then the architecture she had built on top of it was load-bearing nothing. It was built on a lie, which meant it was built on someone else's intention, which meant that the last 3 years of her life had been, in a way she was only now beginning to understand the shape of, exactly what someone had wanted them to be. She sat with this for 4 minutes. Then she stood up. She washed her face in the bathroom sink, cold water. She looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. The face of a woman who was 37 years old and tired in ways that sleep didn't fix, and who had, in the last 4 hours, been told something that changed the map of the last 3 years of her life, and who was still standing, and who was going to stay standing. She went to bed. She did not sleep well, but she slept. Marco called Adrian at 11:17 that night. Adrian was in the back of his car, moving through the city, the way he often moved when he was thinking. Not toward any particular destination, just through it, the city unreeling around him while he processed. His driver, a quiet man named Pryor, who had been driving Adrian for 7 years, and who had long since stopped being curious about the routes he was asked to take, navigated without being directed. "Caro's gone," Marco said. Adrian looked at the window. Rain on glass, streetlights smearing. When? Sometime in the last 3 hours. His apartment is cleaned out, not quickly. It was planned. He took specific things and left others. Left his furniture, left most of his clothes. Took documents, took cash, took a prepaid phone we didn't know he had. His vehicle. Still in the lot. He didn't drive out. He used something we don't have a plate for, Adrian said. That's what it looks like. Adrian was quiet. He knew we'd made him, he said. He had to have known since this morning, Marco said, when you started pulling the Delaware records. Adrian said nothing for a moment. He was thinking about the sequence. The call this morning from the back channel at the Organized Crime Task Force, which he had authorized, which had been, he now understood, observed. By whom was the next question, and the answer to that question would tell him something important about how deep Serena Volkov's positioning actually went. The task force contact, he said, the one who ran Lena's name. Delaney, Marco said. He's been reliable for 4 years. Call him tonight. Don't tell him why. Just find out if he's had any contact with anyone outside his normal channels in the last 24 hours. A pause. You think Delaney's compromised, Marco said. I think Caro disappeared 3 hours after I started pulling records that connect Volkov to Foss to Lena Marlowe, Adrian said. And the only way that's possible is if someone inside the information flow told him to run. The car moved through an intersection. A traffic light went from yellow to red as they passed under it, the red spreading briefly across the wet hood. "There's something else," Marco said. His voice had changed. Not much. Marco was not a man who changed his voice dramatically for anything, but enough. "Tell me," Adrian said. "I ran the Dunn case, Patricia Dunn, the woman from Lena's last assignment 3 years ago." A pause. "She didn't scatter randomly after the case collapsed. She was relocated." "By whom?" "By a nonprofit resettlement organization based in Oak Park," Marco said. "The organization's primary funder through 2 shell layers is the same Delaware holding company." Adrian let that land. "Volkov's organization relocated the woman that Lena was protecting," he said. "It looks that way." "Which means Volkov didn't just want the case obstructed," Adrian said. "She wanted the subject." "That's what it looks like," Marco said. Adrian said nothing. He looked at the city through the rain-streaked window, and he thought about a woman sitting on the floor of an apartment on Huron Street, back against a couch, eyes closed, processing something that had just restructured the last 3 years of her life. And he thought about how that restructuring was about to become significantly more complicated the moment she learned what he had just learned. "Don't tell her tonight," he said. Marco was quiet. "She needs the night," Adrian said. Another pause. Marco had been with him long enough to know when to push and when not to. This was a not. "Understood," he said. Adrian put the phone in his pocket. He looked at the city. He said nothing for the rest of the drive. "What?" Lena's phone rang at 6:42 in the morning. She was already awake. She had been awake since 5:15, sitting at the window of the Huron Street apartment watching the neighborhood below come incrementally to life. A bakery truck at 5:30, a dog walker at 6, the gradual accumulation of ordinary morning activity that looked from 4 floors up like a system operating exactly as intended. She answered without looking at the screen. "Caro ran," Adrian said. She processed this in about 2 seconds. "When?" "Last night. Planned extraction. He's been gone since approximately 9 p.m. She looked at the street below. The dog walker had turned the corner and disappeared. "He knew you'd made him," she said. "Yes." "Which means someone in your information chain told him." "Yes." She was quiet. She was thinking about the fact that a man who had been feeding information between Serena Volkov's organization and Jimmy Caruso's had now disappeared, which meant that whatever he had been building toward had either been completed or had been abandoned in favor of something else, and neither of those options was straightforwardly better than the other. "There's something else," Adrian said. His voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering information they would rather not be delivering. "Tell me," she said. He told her about Patricia Dunn. She listened without interrupting. She sat very still in the chair by the window, and she listened to him explain what Marco had found: the nonprofit, the shell layers, the Delaware company, the connection to Serena Volkov. And she held the phone against her ear with the precise, controlled pressure of someone who is using the physical sensation of holding something as a way of staying connected to the present moment. When he finished, she did not speak for a long time. "She relocated her," Lena said. "It appears that way." "Volkov. She relocated Patricia Dunn." "Through the nonprofit, yes." "To where?" "We don't know yet." "She was a retired school teacher," Lena said. Her voice was very flat. "She was 54 years old, and she had a hip replacement 18 months before I met her, and she collected ceramic birds. She was not—" She stopped. She breathed. "She was not someone who had anything Serena Volkov would want." "I know," Adrian said. "Then why?" "I don't know yet," he said. "But I'm going to find out." "Don't," she said. "Lena, I told you not to do me favors," she said. "This is different. This is mine. Whatever Patricia Dunn has to do with Serena Volkov, I was the one responsible for her safety, and I'm the one who failed her, and I'm the one who's going to understand what happened to her. Not your people. Me." Silence on the line. "All right," he said. "I need access to the Delaware records," she said. "Everything you pulled. I'll have Marco send it. And I need a laptop. Mine is— I'll have one at the apartment within the hour." "Okay." She paused. "Thank you." She hung up. She sat at the window. Patricia Dunn had been found in a warehouse on the south side 3 days after Lena's credentials were suspended. She had been physically unharmed. That was what the report had said. The one Lena had accessed through a channel she wasn't supposed to have access to anymore. Physically unharmed. The phrase had always bothered her. Its precision, its narrowness, the way it closed off all the other categories of harm as though they didn't count. She had held on to it anyway because the alternative was worse, and because the alternative was something she couldn't confirm and therefore couldn't carry. Now she was beginning to understand that physically unharmed might have been accurate and still entirely insufficient. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum. A small gesture, private, the kind you make when something has lodged somewhere in your chest, and pressure is the only available response. Then she took her hand away. Then she got to work. The laptop arrived at 7:45, brought by a young man who handed it to her at the door without introducing himself, and left before she could ask his name. She had the Delaware records within 20 minutes. She spread them across the screen and worked through them the way she had always worked through complex information, linearly, without jumping ahead, building the picture sequentially so that nothing was assumed before it was earned. The Delaware holding company was called Meridian Bridge Consulting LLC, which she noted with a brief, humorless awareness of the coincidence. It had been registered 8 years ago. Its 3 partners were listed, per Adrian's briefing, the man who no longer existed, the current unknown, and Serena Volkov, listed under a name Lena didn't recognize, but that the records cross-referenced to Volkov through a sequence of corporate registrations in 3 states. The financial records were partial, what could be pulled from accessible databases without a subpoena, but they were enough to show the shape of the thing. Meridian Bridge had made payments to a series of entities over the course of its 8 years of existence. One of those entities was a private consulting firm registered in Illinois. The consulting firm had one registered principal, Gerald Foss. Lena stared at the screen. She had spent 3 years understanding Gerald Foss as a coward. In the new light of this information, he was still a coward. The payments didn't change that, they just added another dimension to it. But he was also something more specific. He had not simply looked away from something that might cost him professionally. He had been paid, for years, by the same organization that had needed Lena's case to fail. He had been, in the clean and specific language of the financial records in front of her, an asset. She thought about the night of the parking garage. The phone call. His voice. She had replayed it enough times over the past 3 years to know every inflection, and the way he had delivered the news. She had thought, at the time, that he sounded regretful. She had given him the credit of that, the human dignity of at least feeling bad about what he was doing. Looking at the payment records now, she revised that interpretation. He hadn't sounded regretful. He had sounded relieved. She closed the laptop. She stood up and walked to the window and stood there for a long time, looking at the street, which was carrying out its ordinary morning life below her with the indifferent continuity of streets everywhere. She thought about Patricia Dunn. And then she did something she had not allowed herself to do in 3 years. She let herself be angry. Not the managed, functional anger that she had spent 3 years converting into action. The fuel she ran on, controlled and directed and useful. The other kind. The kind that doesn't convert to anything. The kind that exists prior to usefulness, that precedes discipline, that lives in the body before the mind has had time to do anything about it. She stood at the window of a stranger's apartment in the rain-gray morning, and she was furious. At Gerald Foss and his relief, at Serena Volkov and her patience and her resources, and her ability to construct a trap 3 years in advance and wait for it to spring, at the parking garage and the phone call, and the 53 minutes she had sat there alone believing that the worst thing that had happened was that a coward had looked away. The worst thing that had happened was that she had never been fighting what she thought she was fighting. She had been fighting the visible surface of something that went much deeper. And the woman she had failed to protect, the woman with the ceramic birds, and the replaced hip, and a life that should have been entirely outside the scope of any of this, was somewhere in this city or not in this city, and Lena didn't know where and didn't know why. And the not knowing was a specific physical thing. She breathed. She breathed again. She took her hands off the window frame where she had apparently placed them without noticing, and she turned back to the room and she opened the laptop. She went back to work. At 11:20 in the morning, her phone rang again. It was not Adrian. The number was one she recognized after a moment. Henderson's secondary phone, the one he used when he didn't want a call logged to his primary. "Henderson," she said. "Where are you?" His voice was clipped. Not urgent. Henderson did not do urgent in the conventional sense, but compressed in a way that meant he was managing something. She said, "What happened?" "Delaney's dead," he said. The word landed with its full weight, unhurried, requiring no repetition. "When?" she said. "They found him this morning. His car, off Route 94. Single vehicle. It'll go in as an accident." A pause. "It wasn't an accident." She stood very still. Delaney. Adrian's contact at the Organized Crime Task Force, the one who had run her name through the back channel at 6 a.m. yesterday morning. "Who told you?" she said. "Someone who owes me from a long time ago," Henderson said. "Lena, this has gotten very big very fast. I know. Delaney's been on organized crime for 11 years. If someone reached into that unit and pulled him out quietly—" "I know," she said again. "You need to tell me what's happening." She thought about how to say it. She thought about 3 years and Gerald Foss and Serena Volkov and Patricia Dunn's ceramic birds and a man she had never met who was dead on Route 94 this morning because of a call made at 6 a.m. that had set something in motion she hadn't fully understood the velocity of. "I'm going to tell you," she said, "but not on the phone." "Where?" She named a place. Henderson said he'd be there in 40 minutes. She hung up and picked up her jacket and stopped. She stood in the center of the room. Delaney was dead. She ran it backward. Delaney ran her name yesterday morning at Adrian's request. Caro. Volkov's plant in Caruso's organization had somehow known about it within hours and run. And now Delaney was dead on Route 94. The sequence was telling her something. She ran it again. Caro disappeared before Delaney was killed. That meant Caro's exit wasn't triggered by Delaney being removed. It was triggered by whatever Delaney's query had revealed was coming. Caro had run not because the pipeline was being shut down, but because the investigation had reached a point where his position was no longer tenable, and Delaney had been killed after Caro ran. Which meant Delaney wasn't killed to prevent him from providing information to Adrian. He was killed to send a message. She felt the recognition of this move through her. Cold, specific, the feeling of a pattern completing itself into a shape she could see. Serena Volkov was not reacting. She was communicating. She was telling Adrian, "I know your people. I can reach them. This is what reach looks like." Lena picked up her phone and called Adrian. He answered before the first ring completed. "I know," he said. It's not about Delaney," she said. A brief pause. "Say that again." "The timing. Caro ran before Delaney was killed, which means Delaney wasn't killed to protect Caro's position. Caro's position was already abandoned. Delaney was killed to show you something." Silence. "She's signaling," Lena said. "She's showing you that she's inside your information network. She's not hiding that anymore because she doesn't need to." She heard Adrian breathe. "She's ready," he said. "She's been ready," Lena said. "She's been building this for at least 3 years, probably longer. The Foss arrangement, Caro inside Caruso's operation, the relocating of Patricia Dunn. None of that is reactive. All of it was constructed in advance." "For what purpose?" Adrian said, and she heard in his voice the thing that powerful men rarely allowed, the sound of someone confronting the edge of their own understanding. "I don't know yet," she said, "but she wanted something 3 years ago that required destroying my case, and she's wanted something for the past 14 months that required a man inside Jimmy Caruso's operation. And what those two things have in common—" She stopped. She was standing by the window again, without having decided to move there, looking at the street with the phone against her ear, and something had just arrived at the edge of her thinking, not fully formed yet but present, the shape of it detectable the way you can detect the shape of something submerged in dark water. "Lena," Adrian said. "Hold on," she said. She thought about Patricia Dunn. She thought about the nonprofit in Oak Park, the shell layers, the Delaware company, the specific, deliberate act of relocating a woman who had nothing, as far as anyone should have been able to determine, that Serena Volkov would want. Unless it wasn't about what Patricia Dunn had. Unless it was about what Patricia Dunn knew. "Patricia Dunn wasn't a target," Lena said. "She was a witness." Silence on the line. 3 years ago, Lena said, "the case I was running, it wasn't primarily about protecting her. I was protecting her because she had information. Information about financial transactions she had seen during the period when she worked as a bookkeeper for a medical supply company on the West Side." She paused. She said the next sentence slowly. The medical supply company was a front, she said. I know that now. I didn't know who it was a front for at the time. But if Serena Volkov moved to have my case destroyed and Patricia Dunn relocated, if she went to that specific trouble, then Patricia Dunn saw something in those books that connected to Volkov's operations. And Volkov didn't want her testifying, Adrian said. She didn't testify, Lena said. My case collapsed. Patricia Dunn disappeared into a nonprofit relocation program that Volkov funded. And whatever Patricia Dunn knew about those books has been sitting inside Volkov's controlled environment for 3 years. She stopped. She thought about the word controlled. Adrian, she said. Say it, he said. If Volkov went to the trouble of constructing a relocation program instead of simply removing Patricia Dunn, there's a reason. You don't build infrastructure to solve a temporary problem. You build it because the problem has ongoing value. She's still using her, Adrian said, and his voice had gone flat in a way she had not heard from him before. She has to be, Lena said. Whatever Patricia Dunn witnessed in those books, Volkov has had 3 years to leverage it, to build something with it, to use the knowledge of it as currency or as control. She pressed her hand against the window glass, cold against her palm. Patricia Dunn has been a resource to her the entire time. A silence that had a different quality than the previous ones. She's not just a witness anymore, Adrian said. No, Lena said. She's collateral. The word landed in the conversation and didn't move. Lena stood at the window with her hand against the cold glass and felt the full shape of what she was saying settle over her. The understanding that the woman she had spent 8 months protecting had not merely been failed by Lena's collapsing case, but had been, in the aftermath of that collapse, handed directly into the thing that Lena had been trying to protect her from. The understanding that 3 years of believing she had at least failed in a clean way, that Patricia Dunn had scattered and survived and was somewhere out there living an ordinary life, was a comfort she had been allowed to keep only because the alternative truth was more useful to Serena Volkov when it remained unknown. She had not simply failed, she had been used. Her failure had been engineered, and its engineering had served a purpose that was still serving that purpose. Right now, today, somewhere in this city. Her hand on the glass began to shake. Just slightly. Just for a moment. She took it away from the glass. She made a fist, loose, and released it. She breathed. I need to find her, she said. I know, Adrian said. Not your people. Me. I need Lena. His voice was not sharp, not commanding. It was the voice of someone who was about to say something they had assessed carefully and decided was necessary. You can't do this the way you've been doing things, the way you work. Alone, informal, no structure behind you. That's not sufficient for what this is now. You've handled the edges, he said. You've handled Jimmy Caruso with information and composure, and that was enough because Jimmy Caruso is a collection operation with pretensions. This is different. Serena Volkov killed an 11-year task force contact in the last 12 hours to show me that she can. She's been running a 3-year operation inside 2 separate criminal organizations simultaneously. You cannot go looking for Patricia Dunn alone. Silence. She knew he was right. She knew it the way you know something that costs you something to know. What are you proposing? She said. I'm proposing that we find Patricia Dunn, he said. Together. Which means you tell me everything you know about those financial records from 3 years ago, and I tell you everything I know about Volkov's current positioning, and we do this as something that is neither your operation nor mine. She looked at the wall opposite the window. She thought about 3 years of building an identity around independence, around the discipline of not needing anyone, not because she was incapable of it, but because needing people was a vulnerability, and vulnerability was something she had decided she could not afford. She thought about Patricia Dunn. She thought about what it had cost, the last time she tried to do this alone. All right, she said. Come to me, he said. Now, bring everything you pulled from the Delaware records. She was already moving toward the laptop, and then the window behind her exploded inward. Not a bullet. She registered this in the fraction of a second between the sound and her body's response, dropping below the line of the sill with the automatic reflex of someone who had been trained for exactly this. Not a bullet, but something that hit the glass from outside, something thrown, and the sound of it was wrong for the floor she was on, wrong for the angle, and she was on the floor with the phone still in her hand and her heart doing the thing it did when the body bypassed the mind entirely and went straight to the machinery of survival. She looked up. A small device had come through the window. It was on the floor 3 feet from her. It was not a weapon. It was a phone. A prepaid phone, the screen already lit, a message already on it. The message reading 4 words in capital letters, "I know where she is." Lena stared at the phone on the floor. Lena picked up the prepaid phone with 2 fingers, the way you pick up something that might be alive. The message was still on the screen. "I know where she is," 4 words. No sender ID, no number visible in the header. The phone itself was a cheap burner, the kind sold in gas stations, the kind that left no trail worth following. She turned it over in her hand and looked at the back and then looked at the window. The broken glass on the floor, the cold air coming through the gap, the angle of the throw. And she made a fast calculation about the trajectory, about what floor of what building across the street would have produced that angle, and she did not go to the window to look because going to the window was what you did when you wanted to be visible. Adrian was still in her ear. "I'm fine," she said. Thrown phone, burner, 4 words on the screen. "What 4 words?" She told him. A silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Don't respond to it," he said. "I know. And don't, Adrian." She said his name the way you say someone's name when you need them to stop talking so you can think. He stopped. She looked at the phone. She looked at the broken window. She looked at the laptop on the table with the Delaware record still open on the screen. "Someone threw this through a 4th-floor window," she said, "from a building across the street, which means they were in position before the glass broke, which means they've known where I am since last night." "Okafor," Adrian said, and his voice had gone somewhere cold. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe the building wasn't as unmonitored as you thought." She heard him breathe. "Get out of the apartment," he said. "Right now. Take the laptop, take the phone, use the stairs. I'm 8 minutes away." "Don't come to the building," she said. "Lena, if they know where I am, they're watching the building. You pulling up in your car tells them exactly who I'm with, and right now the one advantage we have is that Volkov doesn't know how much you know." A pause. 4 minutes, he said. "There's a parking structure on Erie, half a block east, level 2, northwest corner. Gray Volvo, Pryor's driving." She was already moving. She took the laptop. She took both phones, hers and the burner. She put on her jacket. She did not look back at the apartment, at the broken glass on the floor, at the cold air moving through the gap in the window like the building was trying to breathe. She took the stairs. The parking structure on Erie smelled of exhaust and standing water, and the fluorescent light on level 2 was doing something uncertain, flickering at a frequency that was just below the threshold of being directly noticeable, but that lodged in the peripheral vision as a persistent wrongness. Lena moved through it fast, keeping close to the concrete pillars, reading the parked cars as she passed them, occupied, unoccupied angles of sight, exits. The gray Volvo was where Adrian said it would be. She got in the back. Pryor pulled out before she had the door fully closed, moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this particular kind of thing many times before and understood that urgency and speed were not the same thing. Adrian was in the back seat beside her. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Okafor," he said. "Don't do anything to him until we know," she said. "If it wasn't him, you've burned a 9-year relationship. If it was him, you need to know who he reported to and how long it's been going on." Adrian looked at her. "You're very calm," he said. "No," she said. "I'm not." She put the burner phone on the seat between them. He looked at it. He looked at the screen, the 4 words still visible. "Volkov sent this," he said, "or someone working for her." "Why?" "Because she wants something from me," Lena said. "Not from you, from me specifically." She watched the city move past the windows. "She's known about me since at least 3 years ago. She had Foss destroy my case. She had Patricia Dunn relocated. She's had 3 years to do whatever she's wanted with whatever Patricia Dunn knows. And now, instead of continuing to ignore me, she threw a phone through my window. She wants you to respond," Adrian said. "She wants me to come to her," Lena said, "on terms she controls." "Which you're not going to do." She looked at him. "I'm going to find Patricia Dunn," she said. "That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do it before Volkov decides that a message wasn't enough." She opened the laptop. Talk to me about Volkov's physical operations, she said. Not the organizational structure, the locations. Where does she conduct business that requires space? Warehouses, facilities, anything that could function as a holding location. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Pryor. Take us to the office on Milwaukee. Pryor nodded and adjusted his route without comment. She has 3 primary locations, Adrian said. A legitimate business front on the south side, a shipping logistics company, a facility in the industrial corridor near Cicero that we've suspected for 2 years but never been able to get close enough to confirm specifics, and a 3rd location that we've had partial intelligence on for about 8 months, a property in the western suburbs registered to a holding company purchased 4 years ago. 4 years ago, Lena said. Yes. A year before she relocated Patricia Dunn. They looked at each other. The suburb location, Lena said. What do you know about it? It's a residential property, large lot. The holding company has it registered as a private care facility, the kind of registration that allows for live-in staff and residents without the kind of oversight a licensed facility would require. Lena's jaw tightened. A private care facility. The phrase had the particular quality of something that was technically accurate and entirely wrong at the same time. The language of a thing that looked like one category from the outside and was something else entirely from within. If she's been holding Patricia Dunn there for 3 years, Lena said, and stopped. It's possible, Adrian said. It's not possible, Lena said. It's what happened. The timeline fits, the infrastructure fits. A woman with a hip replacement who looks like somebody's retired school teacher, living in a private care facility in the suburbs. Nobody looks twice at that. Nobody asks questions. She's completely invisible and completely controlled, and she's been there for 3 years while She stopped. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. She opened them. I need the address, she said. What? The office on Milwaukee was not an office in any conventional sense. It was 3 connected rooms on the 2nd floor of a building that presented as a property management company, and it had the functional, impersonal quality of a space designed for use rather than occupancy. Maps on one wall. A long table with 4 laptops already running. Marco standing at the window when they came in, turning when he heard the door, his expression doing the particular thing it did when he was processing a situation he didn't entirely have all the information on yet. He looked at Lena. He looked at Adrian. Okafor, Marco said. We deal with that later, Adrian said. What do you have on the Westchester property? Marco moved to the table. He pulled up a satellite image on the nearest laptop and turned the screen to face them. Property is approximately 2 acres. Main structure is a large residential building. Looks like it was originally a private home, substantially modified. Secondary structure at the back of the lot, which doesn't match any of the registered usage. Single access road from the main street. We count a minimum of 3 vehicles on site at any given time based on the imaging, which suggests a minimum of 3 to 4 people present continuously. Lena leaned over the laptop and studied the image. The main building was set back from the road, screened by mature trees on 2 sides. The secondary structure was smaller, set apart from the main building by maybe 40 yards, and its roof line was different, lower, more functional. The access road was the only visible vehicle entrance. Utilities, she said. 2 separate electrical connections, Marco said, which is unusual for a residential property of this size. 1 for the main building and 1 for the secondary, Lena said. That's the assumption. She looked at the secondary structure. She thought about what required a separate electrical connection on a property that was registered as a private care facility. She thought about monitoring equipment. Climate control. The specific infrastructure requirements of keeping someone alive and present and contained in a way that was deniable from the outside. She straightened up. I'm going out there tonight, she said. The room produced a silence that had several different components. Marco's silence was the silence of a man assessing a tactical statement. Adrian's silence was something else. Not objection, not agreement, but the silence of someone who had anticipated this sentence and had been deciding how to respond to it since approximately the moment they got in the Volvo. Walk me through it, Adrian said. Not a direct approach, she said. Not the access road. The satellite shows a tree line along the north edge of the property. Mature growth, dense enough to provide cover. There's a gap in the secondary fence line on the northeast corner that looks like it may be a drainage easement. I come in from the north on foot, stay in the tree line, reach the secondary structure without crossing the open ground between the two buildings. And if there are people in the secondary structure, Marco said. I assess when I get there, she said. That's not a plan, Marco said. It's the only plan that doesn't announce itself 45 minutes in advance, she said. She looked at Adrian. I need one thing from you, she said. Name it, he said. A perimeter, she said. Not inside the property, outside it, on the road. If I'm not back out through the north tree line in 90 minutes, I need people who can move fast and create a distraction at the front entrance that pulls attention away from the north side. That's not a small thing to ask, Marco said. I know, she said. I'm asking anyway. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at him without flinching, without softening it, without offering him anything other than the straightforward weight of what she was proposing. 90 minutes, he said. 90 minutes, she confirmed. If you're not out in 90, Marco goes in the front. Yes. And you take Pryor's secondary phone, he said. Single button. Push it once if you need 30 more minutes. Push it twice if you need the distraction now. She nodded. He held her gaze for one more second. Don't push it twice, he said. I won't, she said. She wasn't entirely certain that was true. They left at 9:47. Pryor drove without headlights for the last quarter mile, which was the kind of thing that required a very specific relationship with a road you had looked at enough times in daylight to carry in your body. He managed it without drama and stopped at the shoulder of a service road that ran parallel to the north fence line of the Westchester property, and Lena got out, and the car moved away in the dark. She stood still for a moment and let her eyes adjust. The night had cleared somewhat. The rain had stopped 2 hours ago, and the cloud cover had thinned to something that let a fraction of ambient light through without providing the kind of visibility that worked against her. The tree line was 20 meters to her left. She could see the gap in the fence line from here, a darker space in the darker dark of the undergrowth, roughly where the satellite had suggested. She moved. She kept to the edge of the service road until the trees provided cover, then moved into them. The ground was wet and the leaves were down from the rain, and her footsteps made less sound than she had feared. She moved steadily, not fast. Fast was noisy, keeping the fence line in her peripheral vision, counting distance by the rhythm of her steps. The gap in the fence was real. It was wider than it had looked from the satellite, almost 2 feet, where the fence post had shifted in the ground, probably from water damage in the drainage easement. She went through sideways, turning her shoulders, and came out the other side into the north edge of the property, where the tree line continued for another 30 meters before it opened onto the clear ground between her and the secondary structure. She stopped at the edge of the trees. The main building was to her right and behind her, its windows showing light on the ground floor. She could see the shape of a person moving past a lit window. Slow, unhurried, the movement of someone doing something routine. A second person was visible near the front of the property, standing still, which meant they were watching the access road. 2 people accounted for. She looked at the secondary structure. It was dark from the outside, but the satellite had shown the separate electrical connection, and when she looked carefully at the base of the building, she could see a faint line of light at the bottom of one window. The light leaking under a blackout curtain or a shade pulled down to the sill. Someone had gone to the trouble of making the building look unoccupied from the outside. She moved across the open ground fast and low, keeping her silhouette below the height of the dormant garden beds that ran along the center of the cleared space, reaching the wall of the secondary structure in 11 seconds and pressing against it, controlling her breathing. She listened. From inside the secondary structure, she could hear 2 things. One was the low, continuous hum of a climate control system. The other was, faintly, a television, the compressed, rhythmic audio of something broadcast, voices and music in the particular configuration of a program, watched in a room where no one is particularly interested in what's on. She moved along the wall to the door. The door had a keypad lock. She looked at the keypad. She looked at the area around the frame. She looked at the gap at the bottom of the door. The light was brighter there. She knelt and looked at the gap, and saw, in the narrow slice of interior, visible at floor level, linoleum flooring and the base of a piece of furniture and 1 shoe. 1 shoe attached to a foot, attached to a leg, which was horizontal, which meant the person attached to it was lying down. She straightened up. She pulled out Pryor's secondary phone and pushed it once. 30 more minutes. She had never in her life been so uncertain that 30 minutes was enough. She looked at the keypad. 4 digits. The keypad had the slightly worn look of one that was used frequently, and the wear was distributed across 4 keys in particular. She could see it even in the low ambient light, the subtle difference in finish. 7, 3, 1, 9. In what order was the question, and she had 4 possible combinations if she assumed those 4 digits, and most people chose patterns, ascending or descending or the shape of a letter on the keypad, and she looked at the arrangement, 7 in the upper right, 3 in the middle, 1 in the lower left, 9 directly above it. And the shape they made was an angled line from upper right to lower left, which was a pattern, which was the kind of pattern people chose when they wanted something they could remember under pressure. 7, 3, 9, 1. Upper right to lower left. She entered it. The lock clicked. She stood completely still for 2 full seconds, listening to the inside of the building for any change in the ambient sound. The television, the climate system, any shift that indicated her entry had been detected. Nothing changed. She opened the door. The interior of the secondary structure was a single large room that had been subdivided by non-structural partitions into 3 spaces. A front area with a desk and monitors showing camera feeds from around the main property, currently unoccupied, its chair pushed back at an angle that suggested whoever sat in it had left recently. A narrow middle corridor, and a back section separated by a partition with a frosted glass panel. The television sound was coming from the back section. Lena moved through the front area fast, scanning the monitors as she passed. The man by the front gate was still visible on one screen. The person in the main building's ground floor was on another. A third screen showed a camera feed from what appeared to be a loading area at the back of the main building. And in that feed, she could see 2 more figures, which meant the minimum head count was 4, not 3, and the person currently sitting in the desk chair in this room was somewhere unaccounted for. She kept moving. The middle corridor was 3 meters long and had 2 doors, one on each side, both closed, no light under either. She passed them without opening them. She reached the frosted glass panel and looked through it. On the other side, visible as a dark shape against the light from a television mounted on the wall, was a woman sitting in a chair. Sitting, not lying down, the horizontal leg at floor level had been someone on a cot in the corner to the left. Someone she could see now was a young man, asleep or unconscious, not her concern right now. The woman in the chair was watching the television with the particular quality of attention of someone who has been watching television for a very long time and is no longer actually watching it. The unfocused gaze, the still hands, the diminished quality of presence that accumulates in a person who has spent an extended period in a confined space with limited stimulation and no control over what happens next. Lena had seen this quality in people before. She recognized it. She opened the panel door. The woman in the chair turned. She was 60-something now. Her hair was gray at the roots and had been cut short in the way of someone who had stopped making decisions about their hair because hair was not the thing they were managing. She was wearing clothes that were clean and adequate and entirely without personhood, the clothes of someone to whom clothes are provided. She looked at Lena with the expression of someone whose face had forgotten, through long disuse, how to produce surprise. Then something shifted in it. "Marlowe," Patricia Dunn said. Her voice was hoarse, not from damage, from underuse, the voice of someone who had not had a real conversation in a long time. "Yes," Lena said. She moved to the chair and crouched in front of it so that her face was level with Patricia's. "I need you to listen to me. We have a short window. Can you walk?" Patricia looked at her. She looked at her the way someone looks at a thing they stopped believing in. "I stopped thinking you were coming," Patricia said. "I know," Lena said. "I'm sorry." 3 years, Patricia said. "I know." Lena put her hand over Patricia's, which was resting on the arm of the chair, and felt the particular quality of a hand that has not been touched by someone who meant it in a very long time. "Can you walk?" Patricia Dunn looked at her for 1 more second. Then she straightened her spine. It was the smallest movement Lena had seen all night, and it hit her harder than anything else had. "I can walk," Patricia said. Lena stood. She turned to assess the door, the corridor, the front room's monitors, and stopped. In the monitor room, visible through the frosted glass panel she had left open, the desk chair was no longer empty. A man was sitting in it. He was sitting with his back to the panel, looking at the monitors. He had not been there 30 seconds ago. He had come in while she was in the back section, which meant he had either not seen her enter or he had seen her enter and had chosen to sit down rather than raise an alarm. And neither of those options made straightforward sense. And the thing about options that don't make straightforward sense was that they usually meant the situation was structured differently than you thought it was. She looked at the back of his head. She looked at the monitors. On the monitor showing the front gate, the man who had been standing watch was no longer visible. On the monitor showing the main building's ground floor, the lit window was now dark. On the monitor showing the loading area, the two figures who had been standing there were gone. The screens showed an empty property, which meant everyone was somewhere they weren't supposed to be, somewhere the cameras weren't pointed, and the man in the chair was not alarmed by this. Lena took Pryor's secondary phone out of her pocket. She looked at it. She had told Adrian she wouldn't push it twice. The man in the chair turned around. He was in his 50s, compact, with the kind of face that had decided a long time ago not to convey anything it didn't choose to convey. He was not Jimmy Caruso's kind of person, not a collection operation, not someone who used size and volume as his primary tools. He had the specific stillness of someone for whom violence was neither recreational nor personal, but simply a category of problem solving. He looked at Lena. He looked at Patricia Dunn behind her. He looked at the phone in Lena's hand. "Ms. Volkov would like to speak with you," he said. His voice was even and unremarkable. "She's been waiting." Lena looked at him. She looked at the monitors. She looked at the phone. She thought about Adrian, 8 minutes out, positioned on the road with Marco and Pryor, and people she didn't know, waiting for one push or two. She thought about Patricia Dunn behind her, straightening her spine. She thought about the accounting, the one she always ran, the one she had been running since the night in the parking garage 3 years ago. The one that tracked costs against outcomes and tried to determine whether the calculation was sound. The man in the chair was not alone. The property was not empty. The cameras just weren't showing her what it was full of. Pushing the button twice brought Adrian's people in through the front entrance, which was what Volkov expected, which was what the cleared monitors were designed to produce. She understood, in one fast and comprehensive moment, that the message through the window had not been an offer. It had been an invitation to exactly this. She had walked into it anyway because Patricia Dunn was on the other side of it, and she would walk into it again for the same reason, and that fact was the one fixed point in an otherwise very complicated calculation. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked at the man in the chair. "Tell her to come here," Lena said. Her voice was steady. "I'm not walking anywhere I haven't already chosen to walk. If she wants this conversation, she knows where I am." The man looked at her for a moment. He took out his own phone. He made a call. He said 3 words into it that Lena couldn't hear. He put it away. He looked at her. 2 minutes, he said. Lena put her hand behind her without looking and felt Patricia Dunn's hand find it and grip it with the grip of someone who has been waiting 3 years to grip something solid. And she gripped back, and she stood in the center of the secondary structure on a property in Westchester at 11:43 at night, with the full weight of 3 years of wrong understanding finally resolved into accurate knowledge. And she waited for the door to open, and for the woman who had engineered all of it to walk through it and discover that the thing she had consistently underestimated about Lena Marlowe was not her capability or her knowledge or her reach. It was the specific, unbreakable nature of the thing that had kept her moving for 3 years in the direction of this room, this woman, this moment. The thing that no financial arrangement and no institutional destruction and no 3-year campaign of calculated invisibility had been able to extinguish, which was simply this: she did not stop. The door opened, and Serena Volkov walked in out of the dark and looked at Lena Marlowe standing in the center of the room, holding Patricia Dunn's hand, and for the first time in the 7 minutes Lena had been on this property, something on the smooth and managed surface of the evening shifted into something. Serena Volkov was not what Lena had built in her mind over 3 years. The mind does things with absence. It fills the space where a person should be with whatever that person's actions suggest they must look like. Lena had built someone cold and architectural, someone whose face would reflect the precision of what she had constructed. She had built someone who looked like a weapon. Serena Volkov looked like someone's mother. She was in her mid-60s with silver hair worn simply and a coat that was good quality without being showy, and she moved through the door of the secondary structure with the unhurried ease of a woman entering a room she owns, which she did own, which Lena reminded herself was the relevant fact. She was not tall. She carried no visible weapon. The two men who came in behind her stopped just inside the door and did not advance, which told Lena something about how Serena had decided to frame this moment. Not as a capture, not as an arrest, but as a conversation that she believed she controlled the terms of. She looked at Lena. She looked at Patricia Dunn's hand in Lena's hand. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, nothing so clean. Something more complicated. The expression of someone who has made a long series of decisions and is now standing in the same room as the accumulated cost of them, and is deciding how to relate to that cost. "Miss Marlowe," she said. Her voice was even and measured and carried the faint trace of an accent that had been worked on for a long time without being entirely erased. "You're more resourceful than Gerald gave you credit for." "Gerald was wrong about a lot of things," Lena said. "Yes," Serena said. "He was." She moved further into the room. She did not look at Patricia Dunn again after the first glance, not dismissively, but with the deliberate quality of someone choosing not to look at something that complicated their presentation. She stopped at a distance of about 8 feet from Lena and folded her hands in front of her with the composed patience of a woman who believed she had time. "I want to know what she knows," Lena said. Not a question. "You want to know what she saw in those books at Meridian Medical Supply," Serena said. 3 years ago." "Yes." "It's not as dramatic as you've probably imagined," Serena said. "She saw transaction records that connected a legitimate medical supply company to a series of payments made to entities that were, shall we say, not primarily in the medical supply business. Payments that, properly interpreted, would have demonstrated a financial relationship between my organization and several people in positions of public accountability who preferred that relationship remain private. Politicians," Lena said, "among others." "And judges," Lena said. Serena looked at her steadily. "And judges," she confirmed. Patricia Dunn's hand tightened on Lena's. "She could have testified to that 3 years ago," Lena said. "You had Foss destroy my case to prevent that testimony." "I did," Serena said, without apology, without discomfort, with the flat acknowledgement of someone who had made a decision and evaluated it as correct and saw no productive reason to perform regret about it. "And then you relocated her here," Lena said, instead of the alternative," Serena said. "Yes." The room held that sentence for a moment. "Why?" Lena said. Serena looked at her. The question seemed to genuinely interest her, not because she didn't have an answer, but because the fact of Lena asking it told her something she was assessing. Because Patricia Dunn is 63 years old and spent 30 years teaching 6th grade and has a granddaughter. "She has shown me photographs of approximately 400 times," Serena said. "And because there are things I have done in the construction of this organization that I consider necessary, and there are things I will not do, and the line between those categories is not always where people expect it to be." Silence. Lena looked at her. "You kept her alive because you didn't want to kill her," she said. "I kept her alive because killing her solved a short-term problem and created a permanent condition," Serena said. "A missing woman generates investigation. A woman living quietly in a private facility generates nothing." She paused. "And yes, because I didn't want to kill her." "She's been in this room for 3 years," Lena said. "That's not mercy." "No," Serena said. "It isn't." Patricia Dunn made a sound. Not a word. Barely a sound. The compressed and involuntary noise of someone who has heard themselves discussed in the third person for the last time they intend to tolerate it. And Lena felt her shift her weight, straightening again, and she tightened her grip on Patricia's hand once, a quick pressure that meant, "Not yet." "What do you want from me?" Lena said. Serena looked at her with the expression of someone who has arrived at the part of a conversation they have been planning for a while. "I want the Delaware records," she said. "What Valenti pulled, what you've been working from this morning. I want confirmation that the connection between my organization and the judges and the politicians who appear in Patricia's testimony remains unverified by any party currently in a position to act on it." "And in exchange," Lena said, "Patricia goes with you tonight," Serena said. "She goes wherever she wants to go. She has her granddaughter's address. I know she has it. She asked for it 18 months ago, and I gave it to her, which should tell you something about the nature of what this arrangement has been. She paused. And you walk away from this. Both of you. Clean. Lena looked at her. She looked at the two men by the door. She looked at the monitor room, where the man in the compact face was still sitting, and at the screens showing the empty property that was not empty. She looked at Serena Volkov, who was 60-something and had silver hair and had built a criminal enterprise sophisticated enough to place assets inside two separate organizations simultaneously, and had also, 18 months ago, given a captive woman the address of her granddaughter, and who was standing in this room offering a trade with the calm of someone who believed it was a reasonable trade. No, Lena said. Serena's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. A recalibration. Very small, very fast. No, Lena said again. You don't get the records. You don't get verification. You don't get clean. And Patricia Dunn walks out of here tonight regardless of what you offer me because you do not have the leverage you think you have. Ms. Marlowe, you have men on this property, Lena said. I know how many because your monitors are showing me an empty lot, which means they're somewhere the cameras don't point, which means they're staged for something you anticipated and that I walked into. I know that. I walked in anyway. She looked at Serena directly. But there are people on the road outside this property right now who have been there for 67 minutes and who are waiting for a signal that I am either giving voluntarily or that gets sent automatically in 23 minutes. And the person those people work for is Adrian Valenti, who has the same Delaware records I have, and who has known about the connection between your organization and Gerald Foss since yesterday morning. Serena was very still. The records don't live with me, Lena said. Destroying me doesn't destroy them. You've been running a 3-year operation on the assumption that controlling Patricia Dunn controlled the information. That assumption stopped being valid at approximately 6 a.m. yesterday morning. The room was completely quiet. The climate control hummed. The television, which had been playing something in the background through the entire conversation, chose this moment to emit a brief burst of canned laughter that sounded, in the silence of the room, like something from another world entirely. Serena Volkov looked at Lena Marlowe, and for the first time in the conversation, she looked like someone who was doing a calculation rather than delivering the result of one she had already completed. Valenti will use those records, she said, not for justice, for leverage. You understand that? Yes, Lena said. I do. Then you're trading one form of control for another. I'm trading Patricia Dunn's 3 years in this room for her granddaughter's address and a car ride, Lena said. The rest of it is above my pay grade and always has been. Something happened in Serena's face then. Something that was not, precisely, respect. It was something more complicated than respect. The expression of someone confronting a position they disagree with and cannot immediately dismantle, which is a different experience from simply being wrong and knowing it. She looked at Patricia Dunn. Patricia Dunn looked back at her. The look between them was something Lena chose not to interpret. It had the quality of something that had accumulated over 3 years in a small space, and that was not, whatever it was, simple. It was not simple in the way that nothing is simple between two people who have shared a confined reality for a long period of time, regardless of the circumstances that created that confinement. Go, Serena said. She said it to Patricia, not to Lena, to Patricia. Patricia Dunn looked at Serena for one more second. Then she looked at Lena. Then she moved, and Lena moved with her, and they went through the monitor room and through the door of the secondary structure and out into the cold night air of the property. The man with the compact face did not move as they passed him. Outside, the night received them without ceremony. The grass was wet and cold under their feet, and the main building was dark now, every window, which told Lena that Serena had pulled her people inside before walking through that door, which told her that the offer had been genuine, which told her something about Serena Volkov that she put away to think about later. She got out Pryor's secondary phone and pushed it once. We're coming out, north side. She moved Patricia through the tree line the way she had come in, slower now. Patricia's hip, the replaced one, was stiff from years of limited movement, and she moved with the careful deliberateness of someone relearning the experience of choosing their own direction. Lena stayed beside her and matched her pace without commenting on it, which was the only form of dignity available in the moment and which she offered without making it a thing. The gap in the fence was there. They went through it. The service road was dark, 40 seconds later, headlights appeared at the far end of it. What? Pryor stopped the car and Marco got out of the passenger seat and opened the back door, and Lena got Patricia Dunn into the back seat and got in beside her, and the car moved. Marco turned from the front seat and looked at Lena. She shook her head once. Not now. He turned back. Patricia Dunn sat in the back seat of a moving car for the first time in 3 years and looked out the window at the night moving past, the flat dark of the suburban road giving way to the accumulating light of the city's edge, the glow on the underside of the clouds that Chicago always produced, the particular luminescence of a city that never entirely went dark. And she did not speak, and she did not cry, and she did not do any of the things that people do in movies when they are rescued from long captivity. She just looked out the window. She watched the light accumulate. After a while, she said, "She gave me books." Lena looked at Volkov, Patricia said. "She gave me books. Every month, whoever came to bring supplies brought books. I never asked. She just sent them." She kept looking out the window. "I don't know what to do with that." Lena didn't have an answer for that. She knew that she didn't have one, and she didn't pretend otherwise. "You don't have to do anything with it," she said. "Not tonight." Patricia nodded, small, slow. "My granddaughter," she said. "We'll find her," Lena said. "Tonight, if you want." Patricia looked at her. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," Lena confirmed. Patricia turned back to the window. The city came up around them, and the car moved through it, and nobody spoke for a long time. Adrian was at the Milwaukee office when they arrived. He was standing at the window the way he had been when they left. The same posture, the same focused attention directed outward at the street. And when Lena came in, he turned and his gaze moved immediately to Patricia Dunn, who came in behind her, and something crossed his face that was not an expression he typically allowed. He looked at Lena. "Volkov," she said. "I know," he said. "We tracked the property going dark about 12 minutes ago. Everyone pulled inside." "She let us go," Lena said. He looked at her steadily. "I know that too." "She wanted the records," Lena said. "I told her no." A pause. "She accepted that," he said. "She accepted it because the alternative was you coming through the front gate with however many people Marco had on that road, and whatever Serena Volkov is, she's not reckless." Lena stopped. She was tired in a way that had settled into the specific density of exhaustion that lives below the muscles, in the structures underneath them. She's also not finished. Losing the records doesn't end her. It changes her position. It costs her the specific leverage she's had on the judges and the politicians who've been in her pocket, but it doesn't end the organization. "No," Adrian said. "It doesn't." "That's your problem," Lena said. "Not mine." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It is." She moved to the table and set down both phones and sat in the nearest chair and pressed both hands flat on the table surface, feeling the solidity of it. Behind her, she could hear Marco speaking quietly to Patricia Dunn. Not about anything operational, just the low practical human business of asking if she wanted water, if she was cold, if there was something immediately needed. And she heard Patricia answer in the hoarse, underused voice that would need weeks to fully come back, and she kept her hands flat on the table and breathed. Adrian came and stood beside her, not across the table, beside her. He didn't say anything. She looked at her hands on the table. "Gerald Foss," she said. "Yes," he said. "I want to know where he is." "I know you do." "I'm not going to do anything to him," she said. The clarification was necessary, and she made it without embarrassment. "I want to talk to him. I want him to understand that what he thought he buried is not buried." "I'll find him," Adrian said. She nodded. She sat with the silence for a moment, the silence of the room, which had the particular quality of a space where several people are present but only one conversation is happening, the others suspended around it. "Serena said you'd use the records for leverage," she said. He didn't answer immediately. "She's not wrong," he said. Lena looked at her hands. "I know," she said. "I know that's what happens to this information now. It goes into a system that uses it the way that system uses everything, as currency, as control, as weight on one side of a scale." She paused. "That's not what it was supposed to be." "No," he said. "It wasn't." Patricia Dunn witnessed those transactions because she was doing her job, Lena said. She reported what she saw because she thought that's what you did when you saw something wrong. And what happened to her because of that, She stopped. The information she carried should have gone somewhere that changed something, should have been testimony, should have produced consequences for the people in those records. It still can, Adrian said. She looked at him. The records go to a U.S. attorney's office, he said. Anonymous source, packaged correctly, with enough corroborating documentation that they can't be dismissed. The names in those records, the judges, the elected officials, they become someone else's problem to prosecute. He paused. My organization doesn't appear in those records. My interest is in Volkov, not in the collateral names. There's no reason those names don't go where they were always supposed to go. She looked at him for a long time. And Volkov, she said, is still my problem, he said, handled by the methods available to me, which are not the same methods. That doesn't bother you? It does, he said. Some. She looked at her hands. Some, she repeated. I'm not going to tell you I'm something other than what I am, he said. I told you that at the beginning. You did, she said. She thought about the blue meridian, the cracked mirror, 2 drinks, cash on the bar, a generous tip that was part of a ritual. The anniversary of a night in a parking garage that she had believed until 36 hours ago she had understood. I didn't understand what I was marking, she said, mostly to herself. What do you mean? He said. 3 years, she said. Going back to that bar on that date. I thought I was marking the night my career ended, the night I failed. She looked at the wall opposite. I was marking the night I was supposed to end. Whatever Foss and Volkov built around me, the termination, the investigation, the destruction of the case, it was supposed to finish me. Professionally, functionally, as someone capable of causing problems for people like Serena Volkov. She paused. It didn't finish me. No, Adrian said. I just didn't know why it hadn't, until now, she said. I thought it was discipline, or stubbornness, or the people I found to look after, who gave me something to get up for. She was quiet for a moment. But the reason it didn't finish me is that I didn't know what I was fighting, and not knowing meant I kept fighting anyway, in the only direction available to me, which was forward. She picked her hands up from the table. She looked at them. Patricia Dunn gave me books, she said. Adrian looked at her, uncertain. That's what Volkov sent her, Lena said. Every month. Books. She put her hands in her lap. Someone who constructs a 3-year operation that's sophisticated, who places assets in 2 organizations simultaneously, who reaches into a federal task force and removes a man who becomes inconvenient. That person sends books. She shook her head, small and slow. I don't know what to do with that either. You don't have to, he said. Not tonight. She looked at him. He was looking at her with the expression she had first seen in the mirror of the blue meridian. The expression of someone trying to understand something they hadn't been able to understand from a distance. The expression of someone for whom the attempt to understand was not casual, but necessary. Not a social gesture, but a real effort. Patricia wants to see her granddaughter tonight, she said. Marco's already working on it, he said. She nodded. She stood up. She was stiff. She hadn't realized how stiff. The cold of the property and the tension of the last 2 hours having settled into her joints without announcement. She straightened carefully, and Adrian did not reach out to help her, and she was grateful for that, for the specific form of respect that it was. I need to sleep, she said. The apartment on Huron is compromised, he said. I know, I'll find somewhere. Lena. She looked at him. I have another place, he said. Clean. Okafor has no connection to it. No one has a connection to it. He paused. It's not an offer of anything other than a place to sleep. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. She picked up her jacket. She looked across the room to where Patricia Dunn was sitting with a glass of water in both hands, talking to Marco in the low and tentative way of someone whose voice was remembering what it was for. And she watched for a moment, just a moment, and felt the thing that she had no clean word for. The thing that was not relief exactly, and not satisfaction, and not happiness, but something that lived in the same general territory as all of those, and was warmer than any of them individually. Patricia looked up and found her eyes. Lena nodded once. Patricia nodded back. It was enough. Gerald Foss was found 11 days later. He was living in a suburb of Indianapolis under a name that was close enough to his own that Lena suspected he had not been particularly worried about being found. He had a modest house, and a routine, and a neighbor who described him, when asked, as quiet and pleasant, and not someone who caused any trouble. Lena drove down on a Tuesday. She sat across from him at his kitchen table. He had let her in, which surprised her, and then she understood that he had been expecting something like this for 3 years, and the waiting had been its own kind of sentence, and some part of him was relieved that it had finally arrived. He was older than she remembered. The relief on his face, which she had once interpreted as the relief of a coward who had avoided professional consequences, looked different to her now that she knew what it actually was. The relief of a man who had been afraid for a long time. She put a folder on the table. "You know what's in here," she said. He looked at the folder. He did not open it. "Yes," he said. "The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District received an anonymous package 10 days ago," she said. "It contained the financial records from Meridian Bridge Consulting, the payment logs connecting your consulting firm to that organization, and corroborating documentation on 8 individuals in positions of public accountability who appear in those records." She paused. "The investigation is open. It will take time, but it's open." He looked at his hands on the table. "Patricia Dunn is with her granddaughter in Portland," she said. "She's been there for 10 days. She is adjusting, slowly, the way people adjust to things that take a long time to adjust to." He closed his eyes. "She's not going to testify," Lena said. "I'm not going to ask her to testify. She's 63 years old, and she's been through enough, and the records are sufficient without her." She looked at him. "But she asked me to tell you something." He opened his eyes. "She said to tell you that she doesn't want your apology," Lena said. "She said she's thought about it for 3 years, and an apology is something a person gives to make themselves feel better, and she doesn't want to be used for that. She said to tell you that instead of an apology, she wants you to understand that she had a granddaughter who grew up without her grandmother at birthday parties and school plays and ordinary Tuesday afternoons, and that is a thing that cannot be returned to her, and that the correct response to it is not an apology, but an understanding of its specific permanent weight." The kitchen was very quiet. Gerald Foss looked at the folder on his table. He did not speak for a long time. "I know," he said finally. His voice was barely a voice. "I know you know," Lena said. "I'm telling you anyway." She stood up. She picked up the folder. She had not given it to him. She had brought it to show him what existed, not to leave it with him. It was not a gift, and it was not a weapon. It was simply evidence that the thing he had tried to bury was above ground, was documented, was real. She put it under her arm. She looked at him one more time. She thought about the parking garage, the 53 minutes, the way his voice had sounded on the phone, and the interpretation she had given it. She was not forgiving him. She was not carrying him either. She was setting him down in this modest kitchen in this suburb of Indianapolis, and leaving him with the understanding that the weight he had accumulated was his own now to carry in whatever direction he chose for whatever time remained. She went to the door. "Miss Marlowe," he said. She stopped. "I thought she'd be—" He stopped. Restarted. "I thought Serena would—" "She didn't," Lena said without turning. "No," he said. "I know. I thought." She stood at the door for a moment. "You thought it would be cleaner," she said. "You thought the problem would be resolved and you wouldn't have to know the specifics." Silence. "That's the thing about decisions made for money," she said. "The money gets spent. The decision stays." She opened the door. She walked out into the Tuesday afternoon of a suburb that looked like every suburb, clean and ordered and carrying whatever it carried beneath its surface, the way all places did. And she got in her car and she sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting it. She was 37 years old. She had, in the past 11 days, done the following things. Found a woman who had been missing for 3 years, sat across from the person who had orchestrated the worst failure of her professional life, provided federal investigators with documentation that would take months and possibly years to fully process, and said goodbye to Patricia Dunn at the Portland airport gate with the particular goodbye that belonged to people who had been through something together that they would not talk about often or easily, but that would always be present between them, a shared knowledge of the specific cost of things. She had also done the following: moved into a clean apartment that had no connection to anyone she needed to protect herself from, re-established contact with Gloria Reyes, whose bakery remained open and whose daughter had stopped suggesting she sell, and accepted a cup of coffee from Adrian Valenti in a kitchen that was neither the Milwaukee office nor the Wicker Park coffee shop, but something different, a space with morning light and no particular history, where they had talked about things that were not the events of the past 11 days and discovered, without either of them making a declaration of it, that they were capable of talking about other things. She had not resolved what she thought about that. She was not sure resolution was the right frame. She started the car. She drove back toward Chicago in the afternoon light, the flat Illinois landscape moving around her in its patient, unspectacular way, the sky doing what Midwestern skies did in November, producing a gray that was not oppressive but contemplative, the gray of something waiting without urgency. She thought about the Blue Meridian. She thought about 2:13 in the morning and a glass of añejo tequila and the anniversary she had believed she understood. The parking garage had not been the beginning of something that needed to be endured until it ended. It had been the middle of something, a thing she had been inside of without knowing its full dimensions, moving through it the only direction available, which was forward, accumulating the understanding that the full shape of a thing was often only visible from the other side. She was not on the other side. She did not think there was another side exactly. There was just here. The car, the road, the gray contemplative sky, the particular and specific knowledge that Patricia Dunn was in Portland and Gerald Foss was in Indianapolis, and Serena Volkov was somewhere doing what she would continue to do until the investigation or Adrian or some other force made that impossible, and that the Delaware records were in the hands of people whose job it was to act on them, and that the accounting was different now, not balanced. The accounting of this kind of thing was never balanced, but different. The weight was distributed differently. Some of it had been put down. Some of it had been handed to people with different tools for carrying it. Some of it remained and would remain because it belonged to her in the specific way that the things you were present for always belonged to you, not as punishment, not as badge, just as fact, as the accumulated texture of a life that had been engaged with rather than managed from a distance. She drove. She thought about the cracked mirror at the Blue Meridian and the woman in it who had looked for 23 minutes before Jimmy Caruso walked through the door, like someone easy to overlook. She did not think about whether she had been strong or not strong. She thought about the fact that she had stayed. That was the whole of it, in the end. Not the precision with which she had read a room, or the composure she had maintained under conditions designed to erode it, or the knowledge she had accumulated about Jimmy Caruso's operation, or Serena Volkov's architecture, or the specific financial relationships that had been used to end her career. All of that mattered. All of that had been real and had cost her real things and had been necessary. But underneath it, simpler than all of it, was the single fact that she had stayed, had gotten out of the parking garage, had gotten up in the mornings, had kept a different set of books in a city that ran mostly on the standard ones, had walked into a secondary structure on a property in Westchester at 11:43 on a cold night because Patricia Dunn was on the other side of the door and there was no one else going in. She had stayed. And the city had received her the way it received everything, without ceremony, without recognition, without any acknowledgement that the woman moving through its streets was doing anything other than moving through its streets. That was fine. She had never needed the city to know. She had only ever needed to know herself. 3 weeks later, on a Friday night, she went back to the Blue Meridian. She went at 9 in the evening, which was not 2:13 in the morning, which was a choice. Russell was behind the bar. He looked up when she came in and did the thing he always did. A neutral acknowledgement that said he registered her and was not going to make something of it. She sat at the third stool from the left. She ordered the añejo tequila. No ice, no lime, no salt. She sat. She looked at the cracked mirror. The room moved around her in the ordinary way of rooms at 9 in the evening, louder than it was at 2 in the morning, more populated, the various human businesses of a Friday night being conducted in the booths and at the bar and near the jukebox, which was playing something she didn't recognize, and that was fine. She was there for about 40 minutes before Adrian came in. She had not told him she was coming. He had not told her he would be here. They had spoken that morning about something unrelated, and neither of them had mentioned the Blue Meridian. He sat down beside her. Russell produced his glass without being asked. They sat side by side and looked at the mirror. "The anniversary isn't for 3 more weeks," he said. "I know," she said. "Why tonight?" She looked at the mirror. At the room in it, the familiar geography of the place. The booths, the jukebox, the foxed surface of the glass that made everything it reflected look slightly aged, slightly dreamed. Because I wanted to come here when it was just a bar, she said. Not a date, not a memorial, just a bar on a Friday night where somebody pours you a decent drink and the music isn't too loud and you can sit without it meaning anything. He was quiet for a moment. Does it work? He said. She looked at her glass. She thought about 2:13 in the morning and the version of herself that had sat on this same stool, carrying an anniversary she hadn't fully understood. She thought about Patricia Dunn looking out the window of a moving car at the light of the city, accumulating. She thought about Gerald Foss in his Indianapolis kitchen and the folder she had carried back out the door. She thought about the parking garage and the 53 minutes and the point of failure she had found, and how long it had taken her to find the reasons underneath it. She picked up the glass. She drank. She set it down. Yes, she said. It works. Outside, Chicago continued its large and indifferent life. The streets carried their freight of people and history and the ordinary daily weight of a city that had been here for a long time and intended to be here for a long time more. The lake lay dark at its eastern edge, absorbing the November wind without complaint. Inside the Blue Meridian, a woman sat at the bar on a Friday night and was not invisible. Not because anyone in the room knew her story, because she knew it. That was the difference. That was the whole of the difference. And the man sitting beside her picked up his glass and said nothing, which was the right thing, which she had come to understand was one of the things about him that she would not have anticipated, but that was true, and she sat with the truth of it, the way she sat with most truths now, without fighting it, without requiring it to be more than it was, letting it exist in the present tense where it actually lived. The jukebox played something slow, and the room moved around them, and Russell kept the glasses clean, and the night did what nights do. It passed, and she was still here.